of this perfect image was real, and if, perhaps, it even mattered at all. Rob pushed his chair back from the table, the weight of the night beginning to settle over him. The laughter and merriment continued around him, but he had seen and heard enough. "Thank you, your graces, for your hospitality," Rob said, rising to his feet. His voice was steady, though exhaustion tugged at the edges of it. "But I think I'm going to turn in for the night." Renly, seated comfortably amidst the splendor of his court, raised a goblet in Rob's direction. His smile was warm, disarmingly so, the kind that could make a man forget there was a war at their heels. "Of course. You will always have a seat at my table," Lord Stark, Renly said, his voice carrying easily above the din of the feast. Rob gave a respectful nod, grateful for the gesture but too weary to linger. Just as he turned to leave, Margaery Tyrell gently touched her husband's arm. Her fingers lightly brushed Renly's sleeve, a gesture of such subtle grace that it commanded attention without effort. "I think I will turn in as well, my love," Margaery said softly, her voice carrying a warmth that could soothe even the most battle-hardened heart. Her words were intimate but not so much that they excluded the others at the table, a perfect balance of wife and queen. "I will show Lord Stark to his tent." Rob blinked in mild surprise, glancing between the queen and Renly, unsure whether to protest. It was not often a queen personally escorted a guest to their lodgings, but Margaery seemed entirely in command of the moment. Renly, ever the gracious king, smiled indulgently at his wife. "Of course, my dear," he said, his hand covering hers in a practiced display of affection. He lifted her delicate fingers to his lips and placed a soft kiss on the back of her hand. "I will join you soon." Margaery returned the smile with one of her own, a picture of serene devotion. Her eyes lingered on Renly for a moment before she turned her attention fully to Rob. "Shall we, Lord Stark?" Rob nodded and followed the queen out of the tent. As they walked through Renly's camp, the torches flickering in the cool night air, Rob found himself struck by the contrast between this court and his own. The camp felt more like a traveling festival than a war encampment, the laughter and light-heartedness carrying through the night as though they were not on the brink of battle. Margaery walked beside him in silence for a few moments, her steps graceful and unhurried. She carried herself with an ease that belied the tension that had hung in the air during the feast, the tension of a woman who knew exactly how to navigate a world filled with powerful men. Rob, tired as he was, couldn't help but admire the way she moved through the world, always one step ahead without appearing to make any effort at all. "Lord Stark," Margaery began softly, breaking the silence between them, "I hope you found the evening pleasant, despite the festivities." There was a lightness to her tone, but also a subtle hint that she was aware of the unspoken tension, the difference in how they approached this war. "It was different," Rob replied diplomatically, though there was no need to elaborate. Margaery surely knew what he meant. Margaery chuckled softly, a melodic sound that seemed to dance on the night air. "Renly has always preferred to lead with charm rather than force," she said, casting a knowing glance at Rob. "It works well for him, but I understand it's not the way of the North." Rob looked at her, surprised by her directness. "No," he admitted, "it isn't. My men fight because they have to, not because they find joy in it. I don't think they'd understand this." He gestured vaguely at the camp, the feast that continued even as they walked away from it. Margaery nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Different ways of ruling, different ways of fighting. But in the end, we all want the same thing, don't we? Peace, a place where our families can live without fear." "Peace," Rob echoed, though the word felt distant to him now. After all the blood that had been spilled, after everything that had been taken from him and his family, peace seemed like a dream too far away to grasp. They reached Rob's tent, and Margaery stopped just outside, turning to face him fully. In the soft light of the torches, her beauty was undeniable, but there was more to her than that. There was intelligence, a sharpness hidden beneath the polished exterior. "The North is strong, Lord Stark," she said quietly. "Your men, your people, they fight with a fierceness born of loyalty and love. Don't forget that, even in the face of all this." She gestured lightly back toward the colorful tents and revelry behind them. Rob inclined his head in thanks, her words lingering with him longer than he had expected. "And you, my lady? What do you fight for?" he asked, his curiosity piqued by the depth beneath her poised exterior. Margary's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. I fight for my family, for the people who depend on us, and for a future that's worth living in. Her gaze lingered on him, her eyes bright with something unspoken, a quiet confidence that seemed to hint at her own ambitions. Then, she stepped back, just enough to draw a breath of distance between them. And Renly? Robb questioned after a pause, his voice quieter. Do you fight for him? Margary tilted her head ever so slightly, considering his question with the same thoughtfulness she gave everything. Renly is my husband, she began, her tone carefully measured. He is kind, and he is beloved. He will rule with a level head and always pursue peace. What more should we ask for in a king? Her words were diplomatic, yet there was a subtle layer beneath them, an acknowledgement of the practicalities of power. Robb studied her for a moment, unsure whether she truly believed that or if it was simply the role she played. Of course, my lady, he replied, the words feeling formal and distant after the more personal exchange they'd shared. Margary's smile deepened, and a glint of amusement sparkled in her eyes. Your Grace, she corrected lightly, her tone teasing as a smirk played at the corners of her lips. Rest well, Lord Stark. The days ahead will be difficult, but you are strong, you will endure. Thank you, Your Grace, Robb responded with a slight smile of his own, this time making sure to use the proper title. There was a touch of mutual understanding between them now, a shared acknowledgement of the heavy burdens they each carried in their separate worlds. He watched as she turned gracefully, her emerald gown shimmering in the torchlight, her figure slowly blending into the shadows of Renly's camp. As she disappeared into the night, Robb couldn't help but reflect on the Queen's words and the poised strength she possessed beneath the surface. There was more to her than met the eye, of that much he was certain. But as with everything else in this war, time would reveal the truth. As he entered his tent, Robb couldn't help but think about the strange court of Renly Baratheon, the perfect king and queen who led with charm and grace. He wondered how long that charm would last in the face of war, and if, in the end, it would be enough. But for now, he pushed those thoughts aside. Tomorrow would come soon enough, and with it, the harsh reality of the battles to come. When morning broke, Robb made his way straight to King Renly's council tent. He wanted to get this whole performance over with, gather the information he needed, and return to his army. He was already weary of the festivities and the courtly distractions that clung to Renly's camp like an unwelcome fog. Robb needed action, not pleasantries. As he entered the tent, he found Renly seated at the head of the table, surrounded by a group of advisors. Margary was by his side, of course, but it was the presence of another woman that immediately caught Robb's eye. She was unlike anyone he had ever seen, a warrior dressed in the colors of Renly's Rainbow Guard. She was tall, taller than Robb by a full head, and more muscular than many of the men Robb had fought beside. Her stern expression, coupled with her formidable presence, made her a figure not easily forgotten. Ah, Lord Stark, Renly greeted warmly, his usual light-hearted smile firmly in place. I hope you slept well. Yes, thank you, Your Grace, Robb responded, bowing his head slightly, though his eyes quickly flickered to the unfamiliar woman. There was something about her, an unspoken power in the way she stood, that piqued his curiosity. Renly followed Robb's gaze and chuckled softly. Let me introduce my council, he began, rising from his seat with the air of a man who loved the spectacle of leadership. If you are to join us, you should know who we are. He gestured first to himself, smiling as if the action was self-evident. First, myself and Margary attend every council session, he said with a flourish. He took Margary's hand in his, their fingers entwining naturally. I will not make the mistakes of my elder brother, Renly continued, his tone shifting to something more serious. I will know what is happening in my own realm. And Margary, he glanced fondly at her, offers sage counsel that I wouldn't be without. A feeling I hear you share about your own lady wife. Robb stiffened slightly at the mention of Roslyn, memories of her warmth and quiet strength flooding him for a moment. He nodded, his voice measured as he replied, Roslyn's counsel is always invaluable to me. This is Margary's father, Lord Mace Tyrell, Renly announced, gesturing toward the large man seated to his left. Lord Mace was a figure of considerable girth, adorned in sumptuous garments that seemed to match the vibrancy of Renly's camp. He has kindly taken up the position of Hand of the King, Renly continued, his tone light but underscored by a sense of gravity. Lord Tyrell is a man of great experience and wisdom, and I am grateful to have him at my side as we navigate these turbulent times. This is Margaery's brother, Loras Renly continued, gesturing toward the strikingly handsome young man seated next to his sister. Loras Tyrell was a sight to behold. He carried himself with a grace that spoke of both noble upbringing and martial prowess. Dressed in the vivid colors of the Tyrell house, his armor gleamed under the lantern light, accentuating his muscular build and the strength that lay within. Loras is my oldest friend and the commander of my Rainbow Guard, Renly explained, pride evident in his voice. A man of exceptional skill, both in the training yard and on the battlefield. One day, he will lead my Kingsguard, a position befitting his talents and honor. Loras inclined his head respectfully, his demeanor polite yet confident. Lord Stark, he said, his voice smooth like honey, it is an honor to finally meet you. Renly smiled knowingly before gesturing to the woman in armor. This is Brian of Tarth, the newest member of my Rainbow Guard and the fiercest warrior in the Seven Kingdoms, man or woman. Brian gave Robb a short, respectful nod, but there was no warmth in her expression, only determination. Robb could tell immediately that she wasn't one for pleasantries, and he respected her more for it. A woman who carried herself with such skill and pride had no need for flowery words. She defeated Sir Loras in our melee yesterday, Renly added with a touch of pride, and she is now sworn to protect both me and my queen. Margaery looked over at Brian with a gentle smile. Her loyalty is unmatched, she said softly. We are fortunate to have her. Brian, however, remained stoic, merely nodding again. Robb found himself more intrigued by her silence than by Renly's boisterous proclamations. And finally Renly continued, sweeping his hand toward the two remaining figures at the table, are my trusted advisors, men who have served me and my family with unwavering loyalty. This is Lord Mathis Rowan, a shrewd strategist and a man of great integrity, and beside him, Lord Randil Tarly, known for his valor and wisdom on the battlefield. Renly's gaze softened as he regarded his advisors. I trust these men with my life, he declared, his voice steady and sincere. They are not just advisors, they are my confidants, the pillars upon which I build my reign. Each decision we make is guided by their insights, and together, we shape the future of our realm. Robb took a moment to survey the room, keenly observing the intricate dynamics at play. Renly's council was a fascinating mix of nobility, kinship, and seasoned warriors. Yet, beneath the surface camaraderie, he sensed an undercurrent of divided loyalties. While they gathered under the banner of House Baratheon, many among them were more firmly aligned with House Tyrell, their allegiance swaying like the leaves in the wind. Robb's instincts urged him to remain vigilant. He knew that true loyalty could be as elusive as a shadow in the night. I appreciate the introductions, Your Grace, Robb said after a pause, his tone diplomatic. But I am eager to discuss what we've come here for. The matters of the war. His words were firm, signaling his intent to move past the pleasantries and focus on the pressing issues at hand. Renly raised an eyebrow but didn't seem offended. Straight to business. I admire that about the Starks, he said, though his tone remained light. Very well, Lord Stark. Let us discuss the war, and how we might win it together. Loras leaned forward across the table, his sharp gaze locking onto Robb. There was a challenge in his eyes, one that carried the weight of courtly rumor and the sharp sting of suspicion. Yes, let's get to the heart of it, Stark, Loras said, his tone dripping with a mix of politeness and venom. Because here's the thing, I thought you were aligned with the Lannisters. After all, your sister is betrothed to Joffrey, isn't she? And with the whispers we've been hearing. Well, let's just say there's talk that counsel isn't the only thing your wife has been offering the young king. The accusation hung in the air like a dagger poised to strike. The other lords around the table shifted uncomfortably, but their eyes remained fixed on Robb, waiting to see how he would respond. Loras didn't stop, his voice gaining a sharper edge. So, forgive me if I'm skeptical about where your true loyalties lie. 1 minute, you're calling banners against the Lannisters, and the next, it seems like you're bound to them by marriage. How are we to trust you won't turn tail and run back to the Iron Throne when it suits you? The room grew tense, Renly's easy smile fading as the weight of Loras' words settled over the gathering. Margaery, sitting beside her brother, remained still, her face a mask of calm, though her eyes flickered between the two men. Robb's jaw tightened, and he could feel the blood rush to his head. The insult to Roslin cut deeper than anything else. He knew the rumors were just that, vicious gossip designed to undermine his alliance and question his integrity. But Loras had laid them bare in front of Renly's entire council, daring Robb to deny them or show his hand. "You speak boldly, Sir Loras," Robb began, fixing his gaze on the Knight of Flowers. "But boldness doesn't always come with wisdom. My sister's betrothal to Joffrey was arranged by my father with your brother King Robert, not with the Lannisters." His voice hardened as he continued. "When I arrived in King's Landing, I wanted nothing more than to break that betrothal, but I wasn't in a position to challenge the man who held my father's life in his hands at the time. So yes, Sansa is still promised to Joffrey, for now. But I'll make this clear, that wedding will only happen over my dead body." Loras raised an eyebrow, his gaze unyielding, but Robb pressed on. "And as for my wife," Robb's voice hardened, his knuckles white against the wood of the table, "she is no plaything for a boy king. She is a Stark of Winterfell and the lady of my house. If any of you," he cast a cold glance around the table, eyes lingering on each of Renly's advisors, "doubt her loyalty or her honor, then you are doubting the honor of my house, and I won't tolerate it." A heavy silence fell over the room. Renly shifted in his seat, exchanging a glance with Margaery, whose face remained unreadable. Lord Tarly folded his arms, clearly weighing Robb's words, while Lord Rowan remained still, eyes fixed on the table as if watching a storm brew. "Bold words," Stark Loras replied, though his earlier confidence seemed to waver. "But words don't make alliances. Loyalty does." He leaned back slightly, crossing his arms. "So, tell us, where does your loyalty lie?" Robb straightened, his posture firm and resolute. "My loyalty is to the North and the people who stand beside me, not out of fear or ambition, but because they believe in justice. I don't fight for the whims of a boy king or the greed of those who pretend to rule. I fight for peace, something I believe King Renly seeks as well." His voice was steady, yet laced with conviction, as he cast a meaningful glance toward Renly. Renly's face softened as Robb spoke, and he nodded slightly, the glimmer of a smile returning. "Well said, Lord Stark. Well said." Margaery's gaze finally broke from her mask of politeness, and she inclined her head slightly toward Robb. "It is no small thing to speak truth in a court full of ears eager for gossip," she said, her voice like silk but firm. "Your loyalty to your wife, and your sister, speaks highly of you. But war is not won by words alone." Robb nodded thoughtfully, acknowledging Margaery's point with a measured seriousness. "No, Your Grace," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "But I cannot turn my back on House Lannister, not while Roslin and Sansa remain in King's Landing. If I pledge myself to your cause, if I openly oppose Joffrey, their lives will be forfeit." He paused for a moment, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. "The Lannisters don't forget a slight, and they certainly don't show mercy. My sister and my wife are hostages in all but name. As long as they remain in King's Landing, I must tread carefully. I can't risk their safety, not for any alliance, no matter how strong it may be." "I understand your position, Lord Stark," Renly said, his voice surprisingly measured, though a hint of calculation lingered in his eyes. "But know this, my brother Stannis marches to parley. His forces are smaller, but should his men choose to turn to me, I will have the strength I need to take the capital." He paused, letting the gravity of the moment settle. "When that day comes, I will ensure the safety of your family, your wife, your sister, they will be protected under my banner." Robb's brow furrowed slightly, his eyes narrowing as Renly continued. But Renly added, his tone firm yet not without reason, "In return, House Stark must join our cause when the capital is secured. The North, with its strength and loyalty, will be vital in controlling the rest of the realm. We will need your swords, your bannermen, and your unwavering commitment to secure the rest of my kingdom." He leaned forward slightly, the flicker of torchlight casting long shadows across his face. "This isn't merely about winning battles, Robb. This is about securing the peace that will follow. I will not be a king who rules over a fractured, war-torn realm. With House Stark at my side, we can unify the land, north and south, under one banner. But your allegiance will be required to make that vision a reality." But Loras, though silent now, still looked unsatisfied, his jaw tight as he looked at Robb with suspicion. Robb could see that Loras's doubts ran deeper than words. Whether it was jealousy, rivalry, or something else entirely, Robb knew this would not be the last time Sir Loras Tyrell would question his loyalty. As Renly turned the conversation toward strategy, discussing troop movements and supply lines, Robb's thoughts briefly drifted to Roslyn. He wondered how she was faring in King's Landing, surrounded by enemies. He had to win this war, not just for his people, but for her. For their future. "Meet Stannis with me," Lord Stark Renly said, his voice steady yet persuasive. "Stand beside me on the field when we face him. See for yourself the strength of my men, the loyalty they bear to me, and the cause we fight for. Witness the power we hold, the alliances we've forged, not just with words, but with deeds. And then, only then, make your choice." Robb reflected on the purpose that had brought him here, to uncover the Tyrells' true intentions in this war, to plant seeds of doubt, and to see if they could be swayed to align with the Lannisters. But now, as Renly's offer lingered in the air, Robb found his thoughts shifting. The possibility Renly presented wasn't just strategic, it was compelling. He knew in his heart that the realm would be far safer under Renly's rule than beneath Joffrey. And more importantly, his family would stand a better chance of survival under a king like Renly, one who valued peace and stability. Robb had come here with the intent to turn House Tyrell, to see if their ambitions could be used against them. But now, as he weighed the choice before him, he realized something unexpected. Perhaps it wasn't the Tyrells who would be swayed. Perhaps Renly had turned him. Chapter 21, Robb 9. Chapter text. Robb 9. Robb and his men had spent nearly a week in Renly's vibrant camp, surrounded by the colorful tents and lively atmosphere that marked the king's domain. The news had just come in that Stannis Baratheon would be arriving the following day, and a meeting point had been arranged on neutral ground where both parties could discuss terms. The anticipation was palpable, but during their wait, Robb had developed a bond with Renly that went beyond mere politics. The king had taken Robb under his wing, inviting him on hunts through the lush woods that surrounded their camp. They shared laughter and stories as they stalked their prey, with Renly's infectious charisma making even the most mundane moments feel electric. It was during these outings that Robb glimpsed the true nature of the man behind the crown. Renly was not just a king, he was a friend who genuinely cared about those around him. He listened intently, offering thoughtful insights and the kind of camaraderie that Robb had long missed since losing Jon to the war. The whispers around the camp about Renly and Margaery were impossible to ignore, of course. Rumors swirled regarding their supposed inability to conceive a child and the reason behind it. Yet, as Robb observed them together, he saw a partnership built on genuine affection. Renly would lean in close as Margaery recounted her day, his eyes reflecting a warmth that spoke of deep care. Margaery, in turn, was always quick to tend to Renly's cuts and bruises after his training sessions, her gentle hand soothing his wounds with care. To Robb, it didn't matter if the love they displayed was performative or genuine, what mattered was the bond they shared. In a world fraught with deceit and betrayal, it was refreshing to witness such loyalty and care. The morning sun had just begun to crest over the horizon as Robb Stark and King Renly Baratheon rode out with their retinues to meet Stannis. The camp had been buzzing with quiet anticipation, but the mood between Robb and Renly had remained light. They had broken their fast together, seated under a pavilion draped in the colors of House Baratheon and Tyrell, the rich smells of roasted meats and fresh bread mingling with the early morning air. As they ate, Renly had listened attentively while Robb spoke of his childhood at Winterfell. Robb's tone had softened as he reminisced about the snow-covered courtyards, the long, cold nights by the fire, and the hours spent training with his half-brother, Jon Snow, and his friend Theon Greyjoy. He shared stories about their adventures, sneaking out to the Wolf's Wood, practicing archery until their arms ached, and the mischief they got into when they thought no one was watching. Jon was always the quiet one, Robb said, his voice carrying a wistful note. But dependable. Always had my back, no matter the challenge. And Theon, well. Robb trailed off, the smile fading from his lips. He hadn't received any word from Theon for weeks now. There was a knot in his stomach whenever he thought of his old friend, and of what might be happening on the Iron Islands. I haven't heard from him since he returned home, he added quietly. Renly, for all his playful nature, seemed to sense the weight behind Robb's words. He nodded, not pressing further, instead offering his own light-hearted stories of growing up in Storm's End with his brothers Robert and Stannis. They were stories filled with laughter and teasing, of Robert's wild hunts and their shared jokes at the expense of the ever-brooding Stannis. Robb couldn't help but wonder how Jon was faring at the war. Did his brother know what had become of their family? Did he understand the war that raged in the south, or had he already become too distant, too absorbed in his vows as a brother of the Night's Watch? Was Jon even safe, beyond the wall, where dangers greater than war were said to lurk? Robb wished he could speak with him, just once more, if only to hear his voice and feel some sense of normalcy in the chaos. As for Theon, the silence from Pike gnawed at him. Theon had been his brother in all but blood, but now, with each passing day, that bond felt more tenuous. Theon's absence, his silence, it unsettled Robb in a way he hadn't yet admitted, even to himself. He didn't want to think ill of him, but with the uncertainty of war and the divided loyalties of the Greyjoys, Robb couldn't help but wonder if Theon had chosen his own path, one that might lead him away from the Starks forever. By the time they finished their meal and mounted their horses, the air between them was thick with unspoken thoughts. As they rode out of camp, flanked by Renly's Rainbow Guard and Robb's small company, the two men exchanged a look of understanding. They were different, shaped by different lands, different families, and different fates, but they were united by the weight of responsibility they bore and the uncertain future that lay before them. The road ahead was lined with Renly's banners, and the path to the meeting with Stannis stretched before them like an unknown chapter in a book. Robb couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as they approached the place where the brothers would parley. He wondered if this meeting would truly bring about peace, or if it would only deepen the divisions that had already begun to tear the realm apart. As Robb and Renly neared the designated meeting point, a sense of gravity settled over the group. In the distance, he spotted the figure of Stannis Baratheon, his silhouette stark against the pale morning sky. Clad in dark armor and robes that absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. The lack of hair on his head made his angular features even more pronounced, and the deep scowl etched into his face was a stark reminder of the weight of the world he carried. It struck Robb how different the two brothers were. Renly, with his bright colors and warm demeanor, was the embodiment of charisma and charm, while Stannis stood in shadow, his presence as grim as the clouds that occasionally gathered overhead. There was no warmth in Stannis, only a cold determination that seemed to ripple through the air, contrasting sharply with the vibrant colors of Renly's camp. Beside Stannis stood an older man with a mane of grey hair and a beard to match, his expression wary but alert. Robb reasoned that it was most likely Davos Seaworth, the man known as the Onion Knight. Davos had gained respect as a smuggler turned advisor, but it was the woman beside Stannis that truly caught Robb's attention. She seemed almost otherworldly, her features sharp and angular, lending her an air of danger that was both unsettling and captivating. Her skin was pale, contrasting sharply with the vibrant red of her long hair, which flowed like a river of blood in the gentle breeze. The low-cut gown she wore clung to her form, crafted from a fabric that mirrored the color of her hair. Though there was something fearsome about her, an undeniable beauty radiated from her, one that commanded respect and sparked curiosity. Robb exchanged a glance with Renly, who seemed momentarily taken aback by the woman's formidable presence. "That must be Melisandre," Renly murmured, his voice low enough to avoid alerting Stannis. "She's said to be a sorceress, a priestess of Arla." As they approached, the tension in the air intensified. Robb couldn't help but feel a mixture of wariness and intrigue as he studied Melisandre. There was something in her eyes, a depth that hinted at both wisdom and a hint of danger, as if she held secrets of the world that could change the course of fate itself. Stannis remained rigid, his focus unwavering as he awaited their arrival. The moment felt pivotal, as if the future of the realm hung in the balance, and Robb understood that every decision made here would have repercussions far beyond this day. He took a steadying breath, preparing himself for what was to come as they rode forward, feeling the weight of the moment settle upon his shoulders like an unyielding mantle. "Brother!" Renly called out, a cheerful grin spreading across his face. "What a delightful coincidence to find you here on our morning ride." "Let's not play games," Renly Stannis replied sharply, his tone as cold as the steel of his armor. Renly's smile faltered, but he quickly masked his disappointment with a light laugh, stepping closer to his brother. "You know me well enough, Stannis. I can't help but lighten the mood when the day is so serious." Stannis regarded him with a narrowed gaze, his expression unyielding. "Seriousness is warranted, considering the circumstances." We are not here to exchange pleasantries. His voice was deep and gravelly, the kind that carried authority but also hinted at a lifetime of burdens. As Rob observed the two brothers, he felt the weight of their history hanging heavily between them. The contrast was stark. Renly radiated warmth and charm, while Stannis exuded a grim intensity that sent shivers down Rob's spine. "Lord Stannis, Rob began, feeling the weight of the moment press heavily upon him. "King Stannis interrupted sharply, his tone as cold as the steel he bore. He stepped forward, eyes blazing with an intensity that could pierce through the tension. "I thought better of you, Robb Stark. Your father wrote to me after Robert's death. He swore allegiance to me, and now, I hear that you have pledged yourself to the bastard, Joffrey. And then here you stand beside my treacherous brother. Tell me, do you even know whose side you're on, pup?" Stannis spat, his voice low and laced with disdain. The insult stung, but Robb stood firm, locking eyes with Stannis, unyielding in his resolve. "It's true that I swore my allegiance to Joffrey," he admitted, his voice steady and deliberate. "He held my father captive for nearly 2 moons, and in my desperation to see him freed, I might have said whatever was necessary. If that makes me a bad man, then I suppose I can live with that. I am loyal to the North above all else." Stannis's eyes narrowed, skepticism evident in his expression. "You talk of loyalty, yet you stand with the very man who seeks to undermine your family and your house. Have you forgotten the Stark name?" He gestured dismissively towards Renly, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "Your loyalty seems to be as flexible as the wind, young wolf." Robb clenched his fists, forcing himself to contain the anger simmering just beneath the surface. "My loyalty is earned through proof of intent," he declared, his voice steady. "And thus far, no one on this field of play has shown me anything to prove their worth." "Prove my intent?" Stannis scoffed, crossing his arms over his broad chest, the armor gleaming under the morning sun. "What would you have me do? Declare myself a saint? I am no fool, Robb Stark. The realm is in chaos, and I will not sit idly by while my brother cavorts with fools and false lords, playing in their father's shoes." Renly stepped forward, attempting to ease the growing tension. "Stannis, let's not escalate this into a spectacle. We have the opportunity to unite against a common enemy, don't we? There are threats looming over us all, and your anger would be better directed at them, not your own family." "Family?" Stannis retorted, his voice rising in indignation. "You, who wear my crown and dare to call yourself king, lecture me about family. Family does not betray family, boy. Do you think I am blind to your schemes?" "Join me," Brother Renly urged, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "I possess the support you lack, and deep down, you never truly wanted the burden of kingship. Together, we could dismantle the Lannisters and forge a new era of peace. Think of it, Baratheon brothers, standing side by side in Robert's name, restoring honor to our family and peace to the realm. We can give the people the leadership they deserve, free from the tyranny of a boy king." He gestured broadly, his passion igniting as he spoke. "Imagine a realm where we work together, where our combined strength puts an end to the strife tearing our houses apart. We can lead with purpose, not just in our own interests, but for all of Westeros. You have the right to reclaim your legacy, and I offer you that chance. This is our moment to rise above the chaos and claim what is rightfully ours." Renly stepped closer, sincerity etched into his features. "Let us honor Robert's memory, not through division but through unity. We can reshape the future, brother. What do you say?" Stannis's gaze was as sharp as the cold wind that swept across the field. He ignored Renly's plea and fixed his eyes on Robb, his voice as hard as iron. "Tell me, Lord Stark," Stannis began, each word measured, "you have younger brothers, do you not?" Robb straightened slightly in his saddle, the question unexpected. "Yes, my lord." "2. Stannis's expression remained unmoved, a deep frown etched across his face. "And could you stand by as they took your seat? Could you watch as your birthright, your position as Lord of Winterfell, was handed to another? Could you bow to Brandon? He's the next in line, is he not? Could you bow to him as Lord in your place?" Robb blinked at the question, the weight of it sinking in slowly. "I do not know, my lord," he admitted, his voice calm but thoughtful. "I fear I wouldn't be able to answer that until the day came when I was faced with such a decision. but I do know my father did it. He stepped aside as Lord of Winterfell when the time came, and allowed me to take his place, for the good of the family, for the good of the North. It wasn't easy for him. But that was the choice he made. Stannis's frown deepened, his brow furrowing as if he was struggling to grasp the meaning in Robb's words. Good old Ned Stark, Stannis muttered, more to himself than anyone else. And tell me, boy, who made your father make that choice? Renly, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke up, his tone calm but firm. Stannis, you and I both know that on your own, you're marching toward defeat. Continuing down this path will only seal your fate and doom the men who follow you. Unity is your only hope. Perhaps it's time to realize that, instead of clinging to the Iron Throne like a drowning man grasping at a piece of driftwood. The path to victory is not yours to claim, came a voice, smooth and unwavering, cutting through the tension in the air. It was the Red Woman, her eyes glowing with an unsettling certainty. Your brother walks the road destined for triumph, she continued, her words soft yet commanding, carrying the weight of prophecy. It has been written in the flames. He is the one who will sit the Iron Throne, the true ruler who will bring balance to the realm and save mankind from the darkness that approaches. Her gaze lingered on Robb for a moment, as if weighing his soul, before shifting back to Renly with a glint of something unspoken. The gods have chosen Stannis, and his victory is as certain as the coming dawn. Those who stand in his way will be swept aside, whether they be enemies, friends, or family. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication, and the tension in the clearing grew thicker. Renly's casual charm faltered for a moment as his eyes narrowed, clearly unimpressed by the priestess's proclamation, but there was an undeniable power to her presence that couldn't be ignored. Even the wind seemed to stir uneasily as if the very air had been touched by something ancient and unknown. This is not a childhood quarrel over who gets to wear a crown of sticks, Stannis repeated, his voice harder now, each word landing like a hammer blow. This is a fight for the very realm itself. And you, Renly, play at being king with feasts and banners, while the true threat gathers in the shadows. Renly's eyes, usually so full of warmth and confidence, now held something colder as he stepped forward. A fight for the realm. He echoed, his tone still light, but with an undercurrent of steel. You speak of threats and shadows, Stannis, but all I see are men desperately grabbing at power. And you, he gestured to the Red Woman, you speak of gods and flames, but I put my trust in people, in the living. Not in your shadowy whispers. The Red Woman's eyes gleamed with something unreadable as she inclined her head, her lips curving in a small, knowing smile. You mock what you do not understand, Lord Renly, she said, her voice low, as though speaking to a child who had yet to learn the ways of the world. But the flames show all truths. And they have shown me yours. Renly stiffened, his casual charm vanishing entirely. I have no need for your flames, or your gods. I make my own destiny. Robb, who had been silently observing, felt the air between the two brothers crackle with hostility. The Red Woman's gaze turned to him again, her eyes like embers burning through the fog of the early morning. And you, Lord Stark, she said, her voice once again full of eerie calm. You are at a crossroads. The gods have not yet spoken your fate, but they will. The North remembers, and so do the flames. Renly seized the opportunity to regain his footing. You hear that, Stannis, he said, raising a hand toward Robb. The North remembers honor. Not the fires of a foreign god, or the cold bitterness of a man who's forgotten what it means to lead with anything but fear. Stannis's face darkened further, and for a moment, it seemed like he might draw his sword right there. But then the Red Woman placed a hand lightly on his arm, and he stilled, his gaze never leaving Renly's. You will see, brother, Stannis said, his voice barely above a whisper. When the night is darkest and all hope seems lost, you will understand that power lies not in love, not in banners, but in truth. And the truth is, only one of us can sit the Iron Throne. You are a fool to think you can win against me. Renly's laugh was sharp, a hollow sound against the rising wind. If this is your idea of winning, Stannis, sulking with a woman who speaks in riddles, I almost pity you. But don't mistake me, he added, his voice dropping into something more dangerous, if it comes to war, I will not hesitate to meet you on the battlefield. Robb felt a knot tighten in his chest as the brothers stared each other down, the weight of the decision ahead of him growing heavier. The two Baratheons were locked in a struggle neither was willing to give up. The Red Woman stepped forward again, her eyes never leaving Renly's. "The flames have shown me the future," she said, her voice low and certain. "And you, Renly Baratheon, will not live to see the dawn of your reign." The threat was clear, but Renly didn't flinch. "Prophecies are for fools and children," he spat, his voice as cold as the steel that would soon be drawn. "I'll see you on the field, Stannis." Stannis gave no response, only a lingering, icy stare before turning on his heel, his shadow stretching long behind him. The Red Woman followed, her red gown trailing like blood in the dirt. As they disappeared over the hill, Renly let out a breath he had been holding, and turned to Robb with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well, that could have gone better." Robb remained silent, his thoughts racing. The time for choosing sides was fast approaching, and whichever side he chose, it seemed war was unavoidable. __________. Later that evening, as the campfires burned low and the sounds of men celebrating or sharpening their swords echoed outside, Robb found himself once again in King Renly's tent. The tension of the day still hung in the air, but Renly had cast aside his armor for a more relaxed tunic, sitting at the head of his table with a goblet of wine in hand. He gestured for Robb to join him, offering him a drink. "Stannis has always carried a chip on his shoulder," Renly said with a sigh, his usual charm slipping into something more reflective, more vulnerable. "Never as strong as Robert, and never as liked as me. I think that gnawed at him for years, being the middle brother, always in the shadow of someone else." Robb took a seat, accepting the cup of wine Renly passed him but only holding it in his hands. His mind was still racing from the encounter earlier that day. "He seems determined," Robb said, careful with his words. "Determined, yes," Renly agreed, but his lips twisted in a half-smile that bordered on pity. "But he's always been that way, determined to see the world as unfair to him. Always painting himself as the wronged party. I remember when Robert named me Lord of Storm's End after the rebellion. Stannis didn't speak to either of us for nearly a year. Not a word. He stewed in silence, like a pot about to boil over." Renly leaned back in his chair, swirling the wine in his goblet as he spoke. Robert was the eldest, the warrior king everyone rallied behind. No one questioned his strength, his right to rule. And me, well, I was the youngest, the charming one, the one people liked. I could smile, laugh, and bring people to my side without ever having to lift a sword." He paused, his smile fading as his eyes flicked toward the tent flap, as if seeing beyond it. "But Stannis. Stannis was always just there. The dutiful brother, the one who did everything right but never got any of the glory." Robb frowned, his thoughts circling back to the earlier meeting. "He thinks it's his right to rule," Robb said quietly, "because of the line of succession, because he's Robert's eldest brother." Renly let out a short laugh, though there was no humor in it. "He's convinced himself that's enough. That the throne should be his by right, just because he's next in line. But being a king isn't just about blood, or who's first in line, is it? It's about who can lead, who can inspire, who people will actually follow." Robb nodded slowly, his mind turning over the truth in Renly's words. "And you think people will follow you?" "I know they will," Renly replied, his voice firm but not arrogant. "They already do. You've seen it yourself, Lord Stark. My camp is filled with banners, lords and men, eager to fight for me. Not because I'm next in line, but because they believe in the kind of world I want to build. A world of peace, of unity, where the people aren't crushed under the weight of war and tyranny." Robb shifted in his seat. "And what kind of world does Stannis want?" Renly's face darkened. "Stannis wants what he's always wanted, justice, in his own twisted sense of the word. He thinks he's the only one capable of ruling, the only one who can bring order to the realm. But order without mercy. Without understanding. That's not rule, it's tyranny. And if he sits that throne, the realm will bleed for it." Robb was silent for a moment, weighing Renly's words. He thought of his own people, his family scattered across the realm, and the war that seemed inevitable. "You truly believe you're the better choice," he said, more a statement than a question. Renly looked him directly in the eye, his expression serious. "I know I am. And I think you do too, Robb. You've spent time here, you've seen how I lead. I don't need to burn men alive or force them into submission. I offer them hope, a future. Isn't that what we all want?" "You're right," Robb said finally, the words heavy as they left his mouth. He took a deep breath, his gaze steady on Renly's. "I've thought long and hard about your offer." Renly, who had been lounging back in his chair, sat up straight at the change in Robb's tone. His expression shifted from one of casual amusement to one of quiet anticipation. The flickering candlelight cast long shadows across the tent, making the moment feel more intimate, more significant. "I want to join you," Robb continued, his voice unwavering. "The realm is falling apart under Joffrey's rule, and I've seen enough to know that Stannis would offer no better future. He's cold, rigid, his idea of justice would tear the kingdom apart just as surely as Joffrey's madness." Renly's face brightened instantly, the tension in his shoulders releasing. He leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with genuine warmth. "Robb," he said, his voice almost soft with relief, "you have no idea how happy I am to hear that." Robb could see the sincerity in Renly's face, the same openness and charisma that had won over so many of the lords now flying his banners. But this was not a decision Robb had made lightly, and he wasn't about to celebrate just yet. "But you need to understand," Robb continued, his voice firmer, his eyes locked on Renly's. "I cannot move until Roslyn and Sansa are safe." Renly opened his mouth, ready to reassure him, but Robb pressed on, leaning forward with a sense of urgency. "Please, Your Grace," he said, his tone softer, more vulnerable. "I didn't want to tell you this, I swore to Roslyn I would tell no one, but it's the only way I can help you truly understand." Renly's expression shifted from easy confidence to concern, sensing the gravity of what Robb was about to reveal. Robb took a steadying breath, feeling the weight of his words before he could speak them. "Roslyn is with child," he said quietly. "I cannot, and I will not, do anything that could put her or our unborn child at risk." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with significance. Robb's voice faltered slightly as he spoke, the vulnerability of his confession making him feel more exposed than he had ever allowed himself to be in front of another man, let alone a king. Renly's reaction was swift and heartfelt. His eyes widened in surprise, and then a bright, genuine smile spread across his face, transforming his features from that of a king weighed down by politics to a man who simply shared in another's joy. "Robb, this is truly wonderful news," he exclaimed, stepping forward with excitement that radiated from him. His earlier formality melted away as he clasped Robb's shoulder with a firm, warm grip, the barrier of kingship momentarily forgotten. For that brief instant, they weren't two men bound by the pressures of war and alliance, but simply friends sharing in the celebration of life. "I can't tell you how happy that makes me," Renly continued, his tone more personal, more relaxed, as though he'd been waiting for some spark of good news in the dark world they both navigated. "The North will have an heir. It's a blessing, Robb, one you deserve." His words were heartfelt, but there was a flicker of something else in Renly's gaze, something that lingered behind the joy, a hint of wistfulness. He paused, looking down for a brief moment before adding, with a light chuckle that carried an edge of vulnerability, "I only wish I could put a son in Margaery." The remark, though wrapped in humor, hung between them with the weight of unspoken truths. Robb, sensitive to the delicate dance of marriage and power that Renly and Margaery performed before the eyes of their court, didn't miss the fleeting sadness in Renly's voice. It was well known, the rumors whispered through campfires and castle halls, that theirs was a marriage of political necessity rather than passion. "I swear to you," Robb Renly continued, his voice low but resolute. "Your family will be protected. If I have to send half my army to storm the Red Keep and drag Roslyn and Sansa out myself, I will. You have my word as your king and as a man." The sincerity in Renly's voice struck Robb, and for the first time in what felt like weeks, he allowed himself to believe that perhaps there was a path forward where his family didn't have to suffer for the choices he made. "Thank you," Robb said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to me." Renly smiled again, but it was softer this time, more subdued. "We're in this together now, Robb," he said. "Our families, our people, we fight for them, don't we? That's what all of this is about. You'll never have to fight alone as long as I sit the throne." Robb felt a sense of camaraderie growing between them, something deeper than mere political alliance. Renly wasn't like the other lords he had met, he was a man who genuinely cared for those around him, and Robb could see why so many followed him so willingly. There was strength in his compassion, and Robb found himself trusting Renly more than he ever thought possible when he first arrived in camp. I believe you, Rob finally said, and it wasn't just a formality. Renly's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Good. Now, I'll make arrangements to get your family out of King's Landing, as soon as possible. I won't risk their well-being in the time it might take us to reach the capital. I'll make sure it's done discreetly, of course. We can't have the Lannisters catching wind of it before they are safely away. But once they are, we'll be free to strike. Rob nodded, feeling a sense of hope creeping back into him. For the first time since leaving the north, there was a sliver of light at the end of the tunnel. And once they are safe, he said, his voice steady, House Stark will stand with you. I swear it. Renly's smile widened into something more mischievous. Well then, we should celebrate. It's not every day a king hears news of an heir to the most powerful house in the realm. Rob chuckled, though it was more from relief than anything else. Perhaps once the child is born, he replied, and the war is won. Renly raised an eyebrow. Ever the practical one, aren't you? Rob smiled, a small but genuine smile. I've had to be. With that, Renly gave him a final clap on the shoulder, his mood light but his words serious. I'll leave you to rest then. But know this, Rob, I'll keep my word. Your family will be safe, and together, we'll put an end to the chaos in the realm. Rob turned to leave the tent, the conversation with Renly still lingering in his mind, when suddenly a sharp yelp cut through the air behind him. He froze, the sound so unlike the easygoing Renly he had just spoken to. Turning quickly, his eyes widened in horror at the sight before him. Renly was standing, his eyes wide with shock and pain, and there, buried deep in his chest, was a dagger, gleaming cruelly in the flickering light of the tent. But what chilled Rob to his core wasn't the sight of the weapon, it was that no hand held it. There was no assailant, no shadowed figure lurking in the darkness. The blade had somehow appeared in Renly's chest, as if summoned by some unseen force. Help! The king! Rob's voice broke the stunned silence as he rushed forward, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. This wasn't a normal attack. This was something otherworldly. Before he could reach Renly, Brian burst into the tent, her sword drawn and ready for battle. She was fierce, her eyes scanning the room for the invisible enemy. But as soon as her gaze landed on Renly's crumpling form, her strength faltered. The sword slipped from her grip, clattering uselessly to the ground as her hands flew to her mouth in a gesture of disbelief and grief. No. Brian whispered, her voice breaking as she rushed to Renly's side, dropping to her knees beside him. Her trembling hands hovered over the wound, unsure of how to help, how to save the man she had sworn her life to protect. But it was too late. The wound was too deep, and the blood poured too quickly, soaking through his clothing and onto her hands. A black mass, swirling and shifting without form or shape, darted across the room like a living shadow. It moved with a speed and fluidity that defied explanation, more like smoke or darkness itself than anything Rob had ever seen. It hovered for a moment, as if surveying the damage it had wrought, and then flew from the room, disappearing into the night, leaving behind nothing but cold silence and despair. Renly! Rob shouted, his voice desperate as he knelt beside the fallen king. But Renly's body was already going slack, his once vibrant eyes dimming as the life drained from him. His lips moved, as if trying to speak, but no words came. A single tear slipped down his cheek, catching the light one last time before it fell. No! Rob exclaimed, his fists clenching uselessly at his sides. He had seen death before, more times than he cared to count, but this was different. This was a king, a man who had just spoken of hope, of peace, of a future for their realm. And now, in the span of a heartbeat, it was all gone. Brian wept openly, her sobs echoing in the small space of the tent as she cradled Renly's head in her lap. Stay with me, my king, she whispered through her tears, brushing his hair from his forehead with a tenderness that belied her warrior's strength. Please, don't leave us. But Renly's chest stilled, his breaths fading until there was nothing. Silence fell over the room, broken only by Brian's heart-wrenching sobs and the faint flicker of the dying fire. Rob could do nothing but watch, helpless, as the last traces of life slipped from Renly's eyes. Chapter 22, Margaery. Chapter text. Margaery. Margaery awoke in her tent, her eyes fluttering open to the dim light of dawn filtering through the fabric. The air around her felt thick and oppressive, as if it were charged with the weight of all that had happened. It had been 2 days since Renly's sudden death, 2 days since her world had been upended. The camp around her, once lively and buzzing with the confidence of Renly's supporters, had fallen into uneasy silence. The atmosphere was heavy with uncertainty and fear, whispers of dark magic and treachery filling the spaces between the tents. The news of Renly's death had spread like wildfire, and with it came a mass exodus of the lords who had sworn fealty to him. One by one, the banners of houses once loyal to the Baratheon cause disappeared, taking their men and their hopes with them. Most had turned to Stannis, eager to back the Baratheon who still stood. Only a few remained, the houses sworn to Tyrell, House Hightower, Tarly, and Rowan, along with their bannermen. But even they had grown restless in the last 48 hours, their loyalty tested, their patience fraying at the edges. Margaery could feel their eyes on her when she moved through the camp. They were waiting for something, for her to make a decision, to show them that she had a plan. They wanted answers. They wanted assurance that their loyalty hadn't been misplaced. And so far, she had given them none. Pulling herself from her bed, she felt the coolness of the early morning air brush against her skin, and with it came a sense of urgency. She could no longer afford the luxury of mourning. Renly's death was more than just the end of their alliance, it was a signal that the game had changed, and she needed to position herself accordingly. Her maid slipped quietly into the tent. She didn't greet Margaery, nor did she offer any words of comfort as she began the familiar task of braiding her hair. Silence had become the default between Margaery and most of those around her. In the wake of Renly's death, people simply didn't know what to say, so many chose to say nothing at all. The air was thick with unspoken words and unshed tears, the weight of it pressing down on her more than any conversation could. Margaery watched in silence as her maid sifted through the gowns hanging by the side of the tent, fingers brushing over the vibrant greens and golds of Highgarden, colors that once symbolized life, growth, and power. Now, they felt foreign, out of place amidst the grief that had settled over the camp like a heavy fog. The maid barely spared them a glance before settling on a simple black gown, the fabric draped across her arm like a shadow. This was to be her uniform for the coming weeks, the black of the widow's shroud. The vibrant silks of her past life seemed like relics of another world, one where she was Renly's queen and the future looked bright. Now, the future felt uncertain, and the mourning garb only served to remind her of that uncertainty. This was her new role, at least for a time, the grieving widow, draped in sorrow, while the realm around her teetered on the edge of chaos. Stepping outside, she was immediately greeted by the sight of her bannermen gathered in small groups, their voices low but urgent. The tension in the air was palpable, their faces drawn with worry and impatience. They looked to her with expectation, their eyes silently demanding guidance. Lord Randyll Tarly approached Margaery with the heavy, measured steps of a man who had had very little patience remaining. His face was as stern as ever, but there was an unmistakable edge of frustration in his eyes. The weight of his discontent was palpable even before he spoke. "Your Grace," he began, his voice deep and respectful, though firm. "The men are growing restless. They wish to know what the next step is, where we will turn now that Renly is gone." Margaery met his gaze steadily, her face composed, though beneath it all a storm of thoughts swirled. She understood the urgency, the men needed leadership, direction. But she also knew the importance of ceremony, of appearance, and of maintaining the image of control in a time where so much had been lost. "Lord Tarly," she said, her voice calm but pointed, "I am on my way to bid my final farewell to my husband, your king." She held his gaze, making it clear that Renly's death, though a bitter reality, was still a wound that demanded acknowledgement, even from a hardened man like Tarly. "I will be happy to discuss our plans after I have paid my respects. You should think to do the same." Her words lingered in the air, both a reminder and a rebuke. Tarly, for all his sternness, was a man of duty, and Margaery knew that he would understand. Renly's death was not just a matter of political consequence, it was the end of a life, the end of a claim to the throne that many had pledged themselves to. Tarly stiffened, his face softening just slightly as he bowed his head. "Of course, Your Grace," he replied, his tone more subdued now, though his frustration was not entirely quelled. As Lord Tarly walked away, Margaery stood there for a moment, letting the tension roll off her shoulders. She straightened her back and exhaled softly, bracing herself for the day ahead. It was a day meant for mourning, but decisions had to be made. Decisions that could mean the difference between life and death for her family, and for their future in the realm. With a final glance around the camp, she turned and made her way toward the large tent where Renly's body still lay in state. As she walked, the eyes of soldiers and lords followed her, their curiosity and uncertainty evident. They whispered amongst themselves, some mourning, some restless, some already looking ahead to who would hold power now that their king was gone. The entrance to the tent was guarded, and the men at the door stepped aside as she approached, lowering their heads in respect. Inside, the world was quieter, almost solemn. The flickering light of a few scattered candles cast long shadows over the room, their dim glow barely enough to hold back the darkness. There, in the center, was Renly's body, wrapped in the finest cloth of gold and yellow, the Baratheon sigil embroidered into the fabric. He looked almost peaceful, as if he were merely sleeping. She stood before him, her hands clasped together as she gazed down at the man she had called her husband. Renly had never been hers, not truly. He had been a king, a political ally, and a friend. But not her love. Not like that. Yet, standing there, she felt a strange sense of loss. Her eyes then fell upon the two figures already inside. Her brother Loras and Robb Stark. The air inside was thick with the weight of grief. Loras was knelt beside Renly's body, his shoulders slumped and his face ashen, drained of its usual vibrancy. The devastating grief had hollowed out his handsome features, leaving him a shadow of the man he had once been. His hand trembled as he reached out, fingers hovering just above the rich fabric that draped Renly's still chest, as though he couldn't quite bring himself to touch him. The king who had once been full of life, full of ambition and charm, was now a lifeless form swathed in cloth of gold and green. Loras. Margaery whispered, her voice soft yet filled with an unspoken sorrow. She could see the battle waging within him, his pride as a knight clashing with his raw, personal pain. He had loved Renly, more deeply than anyone ever would or could understand. Now, he was faced with the cruel reality that no sword could defend against death, no matter how noble the heart behind it. Loras didn't look up. His gaze remained fixed on Renly, his lips parted as if he wanted to speak, but no words came. He just knelt there, frozen in a moment he could not escape. In the far corner of the tent, Robb Stark stood silently, his figure a dark silhouette against the faint glow of the candles. His face was set, a mask of stoic calm, but there was something more beneath the surface, a sense of duty, of unresolved inner conflict. Margaery had heard whispers in the camp that Robb hadn't left the tent for hours, refusing offers of rest. Margaery's eyes drifted toward Robb, her brow creasing in thought. What kept him here? Was it respect for the fallen king, or perhaps guilt? Or was it something deeper, an understanding that his own fate might one day mirror Renly's? As he stood quietly, watching her by Renly's side, she wondered if he saw Roslin standing over his own lifeless body. The silence hung heavily between them, thick and suffocating. Margaery stepped closer to her brother, her black gown whispering against the floor as she moved. She could feel the weight of Robb's gaze on her, though he said nothing, merely observing, as though waiting for her to make the first move, to break the fragile peace that had settled over the scene. Loras, she said again, more firmly this time, though her voice was still gentle. She knelt beside him, her hand lightly touching his shoulder. The contact seemed to shake him from his trance, his head slowly turning to meet her eyes. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot and full of a deep, aching sorrow that she knew no words could heal. He's gone, Margaery, Loras whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of those simple words. I couldn't save him. She squeezed his shoulder, offering the only comfort she could. None of us could, Loras. But, you loved him, and he knew that. Loras closed his eyes, as if trying to hold back another wave of tears, and bowed his head. Margaery looked over at Robb again, his posture still rigid, though his expression had softened slightly. She could see that he, too, understood the gravity of what had been lost, not just a king, but a future. Margaery stood then, drawing her strength from the necessity of the moment. She had no time for tears, no space for grief, not yet. There were still too many decisions to be made, too many moving pieces on the board that could not afford to sit still. Margaery shook her head, squeezing his shoulder. We have to keep moving forward, Loras. For Renly's sake. For our family. Loras looked up at her, his eyes red and filled with pain. What do we do now, Margaery? The men, they're lost. Stannis will come for us next, and without Renly. Margaery inhaled deeply, steadying herself before speaking, her voice measured but filled with resolve. We have to be smarter than them. Stronger. Stannis may have won this battle, but he hasn't won the war. She rose to her full height, her words growing firmer. We will return to Highgarden. The Reach still stands with us, and from there, we will secure a future that belongs to us, not to Stannis, nor to Joffrey. Robb, who had been standing quietly until now, took a step forward. If I may, he interrupted, his tone respectful. May I offer my thoughts? Margaery glanced at him, a rare smile breaking through the weight of her sorrow. Of course, Lord Stark. Robb began, his voice somber but sincere. I didn't know Renly for long, but I saw that he was a good man. He cared for the people around him, and I have no doubt that his first concern would have been your safety, both yours and Sir Loras's. His gaze shifted from Margaery to Loras before returning to her. Your Grace, is there a chance you could be carrying Renly's child? A rightful heir might rally those who followed him, continuing the fight in his name. Margaery's smile faltered. Her face softened with a quiet, painful honesty as she shook her head. No, Lord Stark, she replied softly, her words laced with a sadness that ran deeper than mere loss. We were never able to. Renly couldn't. Robb raised a hand gently, signaling her to stop. It's all right, Your Grace. You don't need to explain further. He took a deep breath. Then, unfortunately, we must face reality. You're now in a war with two claimants to the throne, both of whom see you and House Tyrell as traitors. You could return to Highgarden and try to sit out the conflict, but know this, the victor will eventually come for you, and the Reach will be swallowed in the aftermath. You could also attempt to make your own claim or support another, but without a true heir to rally behind, who would stand for a Tyrell on the Iron Throne. Loras, who had been standing by Renly's side like a shadow, suddenly rose, his expression darkening with frustration. We understand, Stark. Renly was our chance, and now he's gone. There's no need to remind us of what we've lost, he said bitterly, his voice edged with grief and anger. Whatever we decide now, it feels like doom is already upon us. No, Robb said, his voice firm but sympathetic. You still have choices, Loras. You can throw yourselves at the mercy of Joffrey or Stannis, claim you were mistaken in backing Renly, and pledge House Tyrell's full strength to help one of them defeat the other. With that, you might survive, and if the gods are kind, perhaps the victor will take you at your word. Loras's eyes flashed with fury as he stepped forward. You expect us to spit on the memory of our king, he demanded. Renly could have saved this realm, he was our last hope for peace. And you want me to betray him? To bend the knee to the very people who laughed as he was cut down? Loras. Margaery's voice rang sharply through the tent, silencing him. She stepped toward her brother, her eyes fierce yet pleading. Renly is dead, she said, her words a painful truth spoken aloud. Clinging to his memory, to what could have been, won't bring him back. Lord Stark is right, we have to be practical. Our only hope for survival is to align ourselves with either Joffrey or Stannis. There is no other way. Loras's face twisted with anguish, but he said nothing more. His hands clenched into fists, and for a moment, it seemed as though he might argue. But then he looked away, his shoulders sagging as the weight of their reality settled over him. Margaery turned back to Robb, her expression unwavering and determined. The question now is, which path do we take, she asked, her voice low and controlled, though the weight of their decision was evident in her tone. Which of these so-called kings is the lesser of two evils? Robb hesitated for a moment, choosing his words carefully. Your Grace, he began, but then paused, deciding to be more candid. Margaery, why did you marry Renly? Margaery's eyes flickered briefly with something unspoken before she gave the answer that had been expected of her. He would have been the best king, she said evenly. A marriage was the best way to secure a future for my house, for the realm. Robb's eyes narrowed, sensing the layers beneath her rehearsed response. Truthfully, he pressed, his voice softer now, but firm. I am a friend, Margaery. You can tell me the truth. She hesitated, her gaze dropping momentarily to the floor as if weighing whether to reveal the ambitions that lurked behind the mask. When her eyes met his again, they were resolute. "I want to be the queen," she admitted quietly, but with no less strength. There was no shame in her voice, only certainty. Rob nodded, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Then I say this as a friend, as someone who respected Renly and would have fought fiercely to see him take the throne. Swear yourself to Joffrey. He is young, volatile, but malleable. With the right guidance, I believe he could be open to an alliance, and possibly a marriage." Before Margaery could respond, Loras stepped forward, his face contorted with a mix of grief and anger. "Joffrey Baratheon is already betrothed to your sister," he reminded sharply. "Why would you seek to displace her as queen? Do you not value your own family?" Rob turned to face Loras, his expression solemn but clear. "Sansa is young, still a child," he said frankly. "She's been through too much already, and she isn't strong enough for the capital, for the game that must be played." His voice softened, though it carried no less conviction. "But you, Margaery. I've seen you. Even in this camp, with all its constraints, I've watched you navigate the politics and the people. You already carry yourself like a queen." Margaery studied him, her brow furrowing as she considered his words. There was truth in them, and more importantly, there was a strange comfort in knowing that someone saw her for who she truly was. Margaery hesitated for a moment, her thoughts swirling as she weighed the gravity of the decision before her. "How is he as a king? As a man?" she finally asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Rob met her gaze squarely, not letting the question linger for long. "I believe he can be guided," he said, cutting through her doubts. "And if anyone is capable of that, it's you." His tone was firm, almost resolute, as though he had thought long and hard about this very possibility. "Joffrey needs someone strong beside him. He may wear the crown, but you, Margaery, you would wield the power. With House Tyrell at his back, the tide of this war could shift. He would be a fool to turn that down. You wouldn't just be a queen in name, you'd be the one truly shaping the future of the realm." Margaery fell silent, her mind racing. The weight of his words settled heavily upon her. She saw two paths in front of her, one that pulled her deeper into the deadly game, and another that led to obscurity or worse. To marry Joffrey might mean becoming a widow twice over, left to weep over another dead husband. Yet what was the alternative? To run from this fight? To fade into mediocrity, or live the life of a traitor, always looking over her shoulder? Her ambitions, her hunger, would never allow her such a life. She had climbed too high to stop now, had risked too much already. Renly had been a chance at a throne, but with him gone, the game was not yet lost. Joffrey already sat the throne, she wouldn't be queen of a camp or of a campaign but queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Before she could speak, Rob's voice interrupted her internal calculations, snapping her back to the present. "Listen, both of you," he said, his tone growing more urgent. "I'll be leaving within the next few hours to rejoin the Lannister campaign. What happens next is up to you, Margaery. I can go back to them with your terms of alliance, or I can name you an enemy." She met Rob's eyes, searching for any hint of hesitation or ulterior motive. There was none. His words were not a threat, but a fact, delivered with the kind of blunt honesty she had come to expect from the young wolf. "I will speak to my father," Margaery declared, her voice steady and resolute. "House Tyrell will once again take up arms, this time in support of the one true king, Joffrey Baratheon." As the words left her lips, she felt the weight of her new role settling around her like a mantle, both daunting and exhilarating. Rob's expression darkened, his brow furrowing as he absorbed her words. His lips pressed into a thin line, a silent acknowledgement of the gravity of her decision. "I understand," he replied quietly, a hint of concern flickering in his eyes. With a final nod, he turned and stepped out into the brisk dawn, the chill of the morning air wrapping around him like a shroud. As he walked away, the enormity of the realm's fate pressed heavily on his shoulders, a burden that would not easily be cast aside. Inside the tent, Margaery turned to Loras, whose face was still tight with anger and grief. "Loras," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "This is our path now. We cannot bring Renly back, but we can still win. For our family. For the Reach. Trust me, brother. I will make sure our house survives, no matter what it takes." Loras stared at her for a long moment, the pain still etched across his face, but finally he nodded. "I trust you," he whispered hoarsely. "I always have." Margaery offered Loras a small, reassuring smile before turning her attention back to the entrance of the tent. The dawn was breaking, casting a soft, pale light across the camp, illuminating the path ahead. As the world transformed around her, so too did her role within it. She paused for a moment, casting one last glance at Renly's still form. Bending down, she placed a gentle kiss on his hands, a bittersweet farewell that signified not just her love for him but also the life they could have shared, a reign filled with promise and potential. With that kiss, she was also saying goodbye to her identity as Renly's queen. She could no longer remain in the shadow of what might have been. She would be queen again, and this time she would rule. Chapter 23, Roslyn X. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. Chapter text. Roslyn X. It had been nearly 2 weeks since Tyrion had arrived in King's Landing, and in that time, Roslyn had never felt more secure within the tumultuous walls of the capital. Tyrion, with his keen intellect and sharp wit, had intervened on her behalf, halting her nightly visits to Joffrey and arranging for a private guard to accompany her wherever she went. His presence had brought a sense of stability. The snide comments that had once been so commonplace had faded, and the wandering hands that had once frequently dared to intrude upon her personal space had not reappeared. It felt as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. During the day, Roslyn found solace in the company of Sansa. They would often escape to the gardens, exchanging hushed whispers and shared stories, their laughter a fleeting balm against the harsh realities of their lives. As they walked among the fragrant blooms, Roslyn felt a glimmer of hope that, together, they could weather the storm that was brewing outside the castle walls. Roslyn had also begun to have frequent meetings with Varys. His counsel was invaluable. He provided her with updates on Robb and the war effort, sharing details that often eluded her in Robb's letters. His eyes, so full of secrets, would glimmer with knowledge as he spoke of the shifting allegiances in the realm and the precarious balance of power. Robb's letters, though infused with love and longing, were frustratingly sparse on political details. Each letter was a tender reminder of his feelings for her, filled with declarations of how much he missed her presence and the warmth of their shared moments. Yet, as much as Roslyn cherished these words, they left her yearning for more substantive news. Varys had shared that Robb had been dispatched to persuade Renly to surrender, hoping to turn the Tyrells to Joffrey's side. Yet Robb's letters painted a different picture, one of admiration for Renly's steadfastness as a ruler and descriptions of the pleasant time he spent in the company of Renly and his court. There was a dissonance between what Varys conveyed and what Robb communicated. While Varys laid bare the stakes of the war, Robb seemed to speak of friendship and the future. In the short span since Tyrion Lannister had assumed the role of Hand of the King, the air in King's Landing crackled with a new energy, one that hinted at change. Tyrion threw himself into his duties, determined to carve order from the chaos that enveloped the court like a thick fog. His first encounter with Joffrey's weekly open court, however, quickly revealed the monumental challenge he faced. Seated upon his gilded throne, Joffrey loved to play with all of those he deemed beneath him, and his weekly sessions allowed him to do just that. But it wasn't long before Tyrion's constant questions left Joffrey feeling disinterested. With each challenge he issued, he watched the boy's enthusiasm wane, replaced by the sulking shadows of annoyance. The boy king's brow furrowed deeper, and the once eager audience turned restless, until eventually Joffrey wouldn't attend the sessions at all. Undeterred, Tyrion began to adapt, reshaping his strategies like a craftsman refining his tools. He began to call council meetings at times when he knew Joffrey and Cersei would be otherwise occupied, Joffrey chasing fleeting whims, Cersei weaving her own webs of intrigue. One morning, after the court had been dismissed in a haze of discontent, Tyrion discovered a treachery that set his teeth on edge. Grand Maester Pycelle, the very man who was supposed to be a pillar of wisdom, had been feeding secrets to Cersei. The revelation ignited a fire within him. Swiftly and decisively, he summoned the guards, his voice calm yet resolute as he ordered Pycelle's arrest. As the Maester was dragged away, the court whispered in shock, and Tyrion allowed himself a grim smile. He had struck a blow against Cersei, stripping her of a vital ally and reminding everyone that he was a player not to be underestimated. But the true heart of Tyrion's plans lay in forging alliances. he understood the fragile threads that held the realm together, and he set his sights on House Martell. Princess Myrcella, with her golden curls and innocent smile, would be the key to securing a powerful union with Dawn. As he meticulously crafted the proposal for her betrothal to Prince Tristan, he envisioned the strength that such an alliance would bring, not just to the Lannisters, but to the realm at large. The court had gradually transformed into a space where Roslin felt a surprising sense of comfort, no longer the brutal arena it once was, where Joffrey and his mother wielded power like weapons, pitting the ambitious against one another for sport. Instead, it began to pulse like the heart of the realm, a place alive with whispers of hope and the potential for change. Though the shadows of war still loomed overhead, filling the air with tension and uncertainty, Roslin felt that something significant was stirring beneath the surface. Tyrion's influence had begun to settle over the court like a protective shroud, subtly redirecting the course of the Lannister legacy and giving the realm a sense of stability that had been sorely lacking. She witnessed the court's atmosphere shifting, the barbed exchanges had softened, and for the first time, she sensed that discussions were guided by strategy rather than spite. Yet amidst this growing confidence, Roslin grappled with her own fears. Now well into the third moon of her pregnancy, she could no longer hide the evidence of her condition beneath the layers of fabric she had so skillfully employed. The swell of her belly had begun to betray her, a soft curve that marked the undeniable truth of her situation. Joffrey, though seemingly tamed for the moment, was a creature of unpredictable whims. She could only imagine how he might react to the news of her impending motherhood. An announcement of her pregnancy would undoubtedly rouse him from his tentative calm, drawing out the darker aspects of his personality that thrived on possession and dominance. The sun had long passed its peak when Sansa and Roslin settled into the quiet comfort of the library, surrounded by the scent of parchment and the warmth of sunlight filtering through tall windows. The air was thick with the promise of knowledge, and as they pored over a grand tome detailing the noble houses of the Crown lands, Roslin felt a sense of urgency underlying their study. The war raged on, and it was becoming increasingly clear that once it was won, the arrangements for Sansa's wedding to Joffrey would demand immediate attention. Roslin was determined to ensure Sansa was prepared for whatever fate awaited her. Roslin traced a delicate finger along the page until it landed on a vibrant sigil depicting a seahorse. "And this is," she began, looking up to meet Sansa's gaze with an encouraging smile. "House Valerian," Sansa replied, her eyes lighting up as she remembered her studies. "They rule from their keep, Driftmark, on the island of the same name." "Very good," Roslin praised, her tone warm. "And what are House Valerian known for?" "They are strong sailors and are descendants of old Valyria, the same as the Targaryens," Sansa answered confidently, her posture straightening with each word. "Exactly. Though unlike the Targaryens, they were never dragon riders, they have married into the royal family several times and still hold significant power among some of the more traditional houses," Roslin added, trying to instill a deeper understanding of the intricate web of alliances that would shape their world. "Okay, let's move on to the next." Before she could continue, the heavy door to the library swung open, interrupting the moment. A guard rushed in, his expression urgent. "Lady Sansa and Lady Roslin," he announced, breathless. "You are called to the Great Hall." Sansa exchanged a glance with Roslin, her brow furrowing with uncertainty. "What could they want with us now?" she asked, her voice a mix of curiosity and concern. "I think we're late," Roslin replied, trying to keep her tone light, though unease crept into her chest. As Roslin and Sansa stepped into the Great Hall, the atmosphere shifted dramatically, wrapping around them like a heavy cloak. The news of Renly Baratheon's death had reached the capital just a day prior, sending shockwaves through the realm. Joffrey, ever the opportunist, had wasted no time in turning the tragedy into a twisted celebration. A feast had been hastily arranged, not to mourn the fallen king but to revel in the misfortune of his house. Roslin could see the long table at the hall's head, laden with an extravagant spread of meats, fruits, and rich wines, all lavishly displayed. Yet, the laughter that echoed within these walls felt hollow, a stark contrast to the somber reality outside. Roslin had hoped to slip into the hall unnoticed, seeking refuge in the shadows of the bustling court. However, her gaze fell upon two conspicuously empty seats placed together at the head table, and she realized with a sinking feeling that they were intended for her and Sansa. Resigned, she made her way toward the table, the weight of expectation pressing down on her shoulders. As she approached, she settled herself next to Tyrion, whose sharp eyes seemed to offer a mix of understanding and amusement at the spectacle before them. Sansa, taking her place beside Joffrey, wore an expression of forced composure, though Roslyn could sense the tension radiating from her. Roslyn caught sight of Joffrey seated at the center of the table, his golden crown gleaming under the torchlight. He appeared to relish the spectacle unfolding around him, his laughter sharp and cruel as he made light of Renly's demise. It was a twisted mockery that made Roslyn's stomach churn. "Look at them," he sneered, gesturing dismissively toward the absent Baratheons, "all those fools who thought they could stand against me. A king unmade. How pathetic." His words drew laughter from his followers, who eagerly chimed in with jests and taunts aimed at Renly's memory. Roslyn felt her heart sink as she watched the scene, noting how easily Joffrey could twist the dagger of death into a weapon of amusement. She exchanged a glance with Sansa, whose expression mirrored her own unease. This was not merely a celebration, it was a display of Joffrey's cruel ascendancy over the wreckage of another man's dreams. As they approached the feast, the atmosphere became increasingly oppressive, the court's laughter mixing with whispers of dread. People congratulated Joffrey for winning a war in which he hadn't lifted a finger, patting him on the back as though his mere presence had vanquished the opposition. "It seems my mother was right," he boasted to those around him, his voice dripping with arrogance. "Renly was nothing more than a shadow of his brother, and now he's gone, just as I said he would be, and soon Stannis will follow him." A wave of revulsion surged through Roslyn as she surveyed the scene. How could they celebrate so brazenly while Renly lay dead? The echoes of laughter and clinking goblets grated against her sensibilities, as she thought of the grief that must be consuming Margaery, Renly's widow. She thought of the close friendship between the two detailed in Robb's letters, and how lonely she must now feel. Now, here was Joffrey, mocking Renly's memory as if it were all a game. A chilling thought crossed her mind: how swiftly would Joffrey revel if Robb were to meet a similar fate? Would she still be donning the black of mourning when Joffrey came to claim her as his prize? The hall pulsed with life, but the vitality of it felt tainted. Roslyn clenched her fists, the opulence of the feast and the merriment around her starkly contrasting with her swirling thoughts. She could not be complicit in this charade. Not when so many had suffered. As the festivities continued, Roslyn felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a mantle. This was not just about surviving in the court, it was about navigating the treacherous waters of power, alliances, and loss. She and Sansa had to prepare themselves for the battles that lay ahead, both in the court and beyond. "May I have everyone's attention, please?" Joffrey called out, his voice dripping with mockery as he smirked at the gathered crowd. "As you may have heard, Renly the Pretender is dead." A loud roar erupted from the room, cheers mingling with laughter, filling the great hall with a cacophony of exultation. "Renly was slain by his own guard in full view of Robb Stark," Joffrey continued, puffing out his chest as if he had orchestrated the entire affair. "And now, thanks to Lord Stark's persuasive words, House Tyrell has pledged its loyalty to our cause. Together, we are unstoppable against Stannis and the Greyjoys." The hall trembled with applause. Roslyn felt a sick churn in her stomach as she listened to the way Joffrey twisted the narrative, relishing his moment of glory while Renly's body lay cold. "Anyone who dares challenge me and my reign will feel the might of the crown. The combined forces of the Lannisters, the Starks, and the Tyrells will crush any challenger. Let them come, and let them experience my wrath." His proclamation hung in the air, a brazen taunt that echoed against the walls of the great hall, filled with the promise of violence and ambition. A chill swept through Roslyn as she exchanged a glance with Sansa, both young women acutely aware of the dangerous game being played. In that moment, the celebration felt less like a victory and more like the prelude to a storm. As the cheers continued to reverberate through the hall, Roslyn's heart sank deeper. She could see the faces of the court lighting up with eager excitement, celebrating bloodshed while remaining blissfully ignorant of the pain that accompanied it. Joffrey's bravado had become a grotesque performance, and with every word, he transformed Renly's death into a spectacle, a display of his dominance. Roslyn glanced at Sansa, whose eyes were wide, a mixture of horror and disbelief playing across her features. Sansa's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her goblet, her knuckles turning white against the metal. "I can't believe he's so heartless," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the raucous laughter. "How can he celebrate while the realm burns?" Rosalind squeezed Sansa's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. We must endure this, Sansa. We cannot show weakness. Not here, not now. Joffrey, oblivious to the quiet discontent rippling through the room, continued his tirade. To celebrate our victory, I've ordered a feast unlike any other. Let the halls be filled with music and merriment as we toast to our future, a future free of Renly Baratheon. He raised his goblet high, a golden chalice gleaming in the torchlight. And to Lord Stark, who has proven himself an ally worthy of our trust. Joffrey added, a smirk stretching across his face. He glanced at Rosalind, a cruel light dancing in his eyes. At the mention of Robb, a shudder ran through Rosalind. She thought of him, of his loyalty, his fierce love, and the precarious position he now found himself in. Would he continue to stand strong, or would this war consume him like it had so many others? The weight of her own fears settled heavily upon her as she mentally prepared for what the future might hold. Tonight, we feast, Joffrey announced, and the hall erupted once more into cheers and applause. He glanced around, as if searching for anyone who might challenge him, but found none. The gathered courtiers were too enchanted by his proclamations, too fearful of his wrath, to question him now. As the noise subsided, Rosalind caught sight of Tyrion, seated next to her, his expression a mask of concern. He raised an eyebrow in her direction, silently inquiring if she was all right. She managed a tight smile, though the gesture felt like a thin veneer over the turmoil roiling within her. Your Grace, Tyrion said, standing to address Joffrey. If I may suggest, perhaps we should consider a more somber approach to our new alliances. Somber? Joffrey scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. What use is somber when victory is at hand? What say you, my good uncle? Do you wish to dampen my triumph with your dull wisdom? Tyrion's gaze remained steady, unyielding in the face of Joffrey's arrogance. Rosalind stood quickly, wanting to support Tyrion. I think Lord Tyrion is merely suggest we remember the lives lost, especially Renly's, and show respect to those who mourn. Margaery Tyrell will soon be among us, and her grief is not to be trifled with. We should consider how our actions reflect upon the crown. Joffrey rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed. Margaery can weep if she likes. After all, it's not my fault her husband was weak. Joffrey turned back to the assembled court, his demeanor shifting to one of theatrical gravitas. If I could have your attention once more, he called out, his voice rising above the chatter. The room fell silent, all eyes on him, expectant and eager. I have another announcement. He paused for effect, the tension palpable, and then flashed a conspiratorial grin at Rosalind. Lady Rosalind, please stay standing. Her heart raced at his command, unsure of what was to come. Joffrey's voice rang out, resonating with a mix of pride and malice. On this day, where we are a step closer to ending this war and returning the realm to the peace it deserves, let us look to the future. Lady Rosalind and I are delighted to share the news that she is with child. A wave of applause erupted from the court, loud and boisterous, but Rosalind felt as if the ground beneath her might swallow her whole. Shock and dismay coursed through her, cold and swift. How could he know? A part of her was desperate to flee from the scrutiny of 1,000 eyes, but she remained standing, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She glanced at Sansa, whose expression mirrored her own horror. Sansa's mouth formed a small O of disbelief, eyes wide as if she had just witnessed a cruel betrayal. Joffrey's announcement was not merely a revelation, it was a calculated maneuver, designed to sow doubt and confusion. With the rumors surrounding her and Joffrey, this declaration was bound to bring about doubts over her child's parentage, casting shadows over the life growing within her. Is it truly so? Is it the king's? Whispered a voice from the back of the hall, barely audible yet cutting through the applause. Rosalind's stomach twisted at the implications of those words. Congratulations, Your Grace and Lady Rosalind, a voice called, but Rosalind could hardly respond. She forced a smile, feeling the strain of it stretch across her lips. Every cheer felt like a knife, each clap a reminder of the precariousness of her situation. Joffrey was reveling in the attention, basking in the glory of the moment, but all Rosalind could think of was the implications of his words. The way he spoke, the way he twisted the narrative, made her skin crawl. She felt exposed, a pawn in his game, the future of her child now entangled in the whims of a boy king who thrived on chaos and cruelty. Notes. Thank you so much to anyone that has read this far, it means so much to me. I started writing this story years ago and for a variety of reasons never got much further than chapter 5, but this story has lived on in my head, so it feels amazing to be continuing it all these years later. I apologize for spam uploading 20 plus chapters of this in one day, but this story already exists on fanfiction.net and I want this version to be up to date with it. From now on chapters will hopefully be coming regularly. I aim for at least one chapter most weekdays, but sometimes it's less, sometimes more. Please leave a comment if you enjoy. I know this story really isn't for everyone and I truly am writing it just for myself, but I would love to think that even one person enjoys my writing. Thanks again. Chapter 24, Caitlin 3. Chapter text. Caitlin 3. The journey to Winterfell had felt like an endless stretch of hardship, each mile marked by mud that clung stubbornly to their boots and a wind that bit fiercely at their faces. Caitlin Stark wrapped her cloak tighter around her shoulders, reminding herself that winter was closing in, as Ned had pointed out more than once. Winter is close, he would say, his voice steady and reassuring, yet the chill in the air seemed to seep into her very bones. But it wasn't the cold or the mud that troubled Caitlin the most, it was the weight of worry that settled in her heart as she watched Arya. Her daughter had always been spirited, fiercely independent and more at home with a sword than with the fine dresses her mother wished she would wear. Yet on this journey, Arya had grown more restless than ever, alone in her silence, as if a shadow had taken root within her. Caitlin had taken to sleeping in Arya's tent, the need to keep her daughter safe outweighing any need for personal comfort. She could feel the anxiety radiating off Arya, the way her young face would twist in distress even in sleep. Night after night, Arya would awaken, thrashing in her blankets, her eyes wide with terror. The nightmares had begun to plague her, and Caitlin couldn't help but worry, what horrors were haunting her daughter's dreams. During the days, she often watched Arya wandering the camp, her daughter's footsteps heavy with the burden of loneliness. There was no one for her to play with, no other children to share laughter or games. Caitlin noticed how Arya's spirit dimmed, her eyes clouded with thoughts she didn't share. How could she reach her daughter when the very act of trying seemed to draw Arya further away? The thought of returning to Winterfell stirred a tempest of emotions within Caitlin. While the idea of stepping back into her beloved home filled her with a yearning for familiarity, the weight of dread quickly followed. They had dispatched scouts ahead, hoping for news that would bring them comfort, but the reports that returned were anything but reassuring. The north was in turmoil, overrun by Iron Islanders who had swept through towns and keeps while the men were off fighting King Joffrey's war. Caitlin's heart sank as she imagined the chaos unfolding in her homeland. She pictured the strong stone walls of Winterfell, usually standing resolute against the elements, now perhaps trembling under the weight of invaders. The familiar paths she had walked so many times now felt like a distant memory tainted by uncertainty and fear. Would the people of Winterfell, her people, still be safe within its walls? Would they have managed to repel the Ironborn, those ruthless marauders who thrived on chaos and pillage? Her thoughts turned to Bran, her second son, so young and yet thrust into the mantle of leadership. He had been acting as Lord of Winterfell for nearly 5 months now, a role far too heavy for his small shoulders. She had never been as happy as when she received the letter that he had woken up, but now she feared that she would never see him again. Caitlin's mind raced as she envisioned the castle. She could almost see Bran at the top of the stairs, looking out over the courtyard with a brave face, though she knew he must feel the weight of their family's absence pressing down on him. What if the Iron Islanders had breached the gates? What if they had captured her sons or worse? The very thought twisted in her gut, igniting a fierce need to return home and shield her children from the horrors that awaited them. She hoped desperately that the men she trusted would not fail in their duty to protect her boys. The thought of loyal servants like Maester Luwin and the guards of Winterfell, men who had served her family for years, brought a flicker of reassurance. They would do everything in their power to keep Bran and Rickon safe. Yet, as a mother, Caitlin couldn't help but feel the gnawing ache of fear and uncertainty. The icy wind swept through the camp, biting at her skin, but it was nothing compared to the cold dread that gripped her heart. She thought of her children, separated by miles but united in her heart. Caitlin could almost hear Rickon's laughter echoing through the halls, could almost see Bran smiling in that way that seemed to brighten the whole world. Would they still be there when she returned? Would Winterfell still be a place of warmth and laughter, or would it be tainted by the encroaching shadows of war? Underscore 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 underscore. Dawn had just begun to paint the sky in hues of pale gold and lavender when the distant peaks of Winterfell's towers finally came into view. Catelyn felt her heart quicken at the sight, a mix of relief and anxiety washing over her. They were almost home, but the home they approached was not the same one they had left behind. The cold wind whipped around her, biting at her cheeks, but it was nothing compared to the tension tightening her chest. The night before, they had been forced to halt just shy of their destination. The winds had howled through the trees, and the snow had fallen so thickly that it became impossible to push forward. Even Ned, who rarely allowed anything to slow him down, had agreed to set up camp. But the rest had been brief. As soon as the faintest glow of dawn had touched the horizon, Ned had insisted they set out again. He was a man who had grown weary of the endless games and politics of the southern courts. All he wanted now was to reclaim his home, to put an end to the chaos that had engulfed Winterfell. Catelyn watched as her husband led the remainder of their men toward the keep, his posture tense with determination. His dark cloak billowed behind him as he rode ahead, leaving her behind with Arya and a small group of guards. They had decided it was safest for Catelyn to stay back, to keep Arya far from the immediate danger. Theon Greyjoy had betrayed them, betrayed everything they had done for him, and now he sat in the great hall of Winterfell, calling himself its prince. The idea sickened Catelyn. She had trusted him, trusted his bond with Robb, but the boy had turned against them at the worst possible moment. Still, the reports from their scouts had offered a sliver of hope. Theon had taken Winterfell, yes, but he had done so with a small force, far too few men to defend the ancient keep against even the modest number of loyal soldiers that had been sent to escort her and Ned back north. But nothing was certain. Ned had ridden off with a plan to recapture their home, but plans could change. The Ironborn were notorious for their brutality, and Theon, desperate to hold on to his ill-gotten power, might resort to anything. And so, Catelyn had insisted they remain on their horses, saddled and ready to flee if the need arose. She couldn't bear to lose any more of her children to this war. Robb was already out in the field, a commander in a war she hadn't wanted for him. Sansa was a prisoner in King's Landing, and they had yet to hear any word of Bran and Rickon since the Ironborn had taken Winterfell. As the hours dragged on, the cold seeping deeper into her bones, Catelyn couldn't shake the growing unease that gnawed at her insides. Every passing moment felt like an eternity, her gaze fixed on the distant towers of Winterfell, hoping for any sign of movement, for anything to tell her that Ned had succeeded. Her fingers tightened around the reins, the leather biting into her palms as she tried to keep herself composed. Arya, restless as always, fidgeted beside her, her small frame brimming with nervous energy. "What do you think is happening?" Arya asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she glanced up at her mother, her grey eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and fear. Despite all her bravado, Arya was still a child, still vulnerable, and Catelyn could see how much the uncertainty of the situation weighed on her. Catelyn forced herself to give a reassuring smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Your father knows what he's doing," she said softly. "He will bring us home." The cold wind cut across the camp, a bitter reminder of the harsh realities they faced. She shifted uneasily in her saddle, glancing toward the tree line, half expecting to see Ironborn raiders come charging from the shadows at any moment. The north was a vast and unforgiving land, and though it was their home, Catelyn knew all too well that it could just as easily become their grave if things went wrong. Hours passed, and the tension grew heavier with every breath. Catelyn couldn't bear the waiting much longer. Her thoughts spun in dark circles, conjuring every possible outcome: victory, defeat, capture, escape. She thought of Theon, once a boy under her roof, now an enemy. What could have driven him to such betrayal? Was it pride? Desperation to prove himself to his father, Balon Greyjoy? It didn't matter now. Whatever his reasons, Theon had made his choice, and they would have to deal with the consequences. Finally, in the distance, she saw movement, a rider approaching at speed. Catelyn straightened in her saddle, her heart leaping into her throat as the figure grew closer. She could see the stark banners fluttering in the breeze, and for the first time in hours, she allowed herself to hope. Underscore 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 underscore. Catelyn walked through the courtyard of Winterfell, her steps slow and heavy as she took in the grim sight before her. Only half a year ago, this place had been alive with the sounds of laughter and the clashing of wooden swords. She could still picture it clearly, the courtyard bustling with life. Rob, still a boy, laughing as Bran struggled to lift a training sword that was too heavy for him. Arya darting past, holding a stolen piece of stitching high above her head, with Sansa hot on her heels, her cheeks flushed as she tried desperately to get it back. The memories played out before her eyes, so vivid and close that she almost believed she could reach out and touch them. Back then, she and Ned would watch from the balcony, side by side, while she held Rickon in her arms. His tiny hands would grasp at her fingers, unaware of the world around him, secure in the safety of their home. Even Jon Snow had been there, a silent shadow at the edge of their family's joy, but part of it nonetheless. She remembered how she had hated him, how she had resented his very presence in her household. But now, looking out at the desolation that had claimed her home, Catelyn would have given anything to see Jon once more, laughing with Robb, as they had once done in better days. How foolish that hatred seemed now in the face of everything they had lost. But Winterfell was no longer that place of warmth and family. Now it was a graveyard. The courtyard where her children had played was littered with bodies, both northern men and Ironborn raiders alike, their blood staining the snow a sickly red. The air was thick with the stench of death, and the silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional groan of a dying man or the sharp cry of a crow circling overhead. Catelyn instinctively reached out to Arya, trying to shield her from the horror around them. Arya had seen enough violence already, more than any girl her age should ever witness. But it was too late. Arya's wide, grey eyes had already taken in the sight, her face pale but expressionless. The girl had changed, hardened by the realities of war and loss. She no longer flinched at the sight of blood or death, and it broke Catelyn's heart to see the innocence stripped from her daughter so completely. "I'm sorry," Catelyn whispered, though whether she was speaking to Arya, to the dead, or to the memory of her family that had once filled this place with life, she couldn't say. They moved through the courtyard, the crunch of their footsteps muffled by the thick snow that covered the ground, now trampled and stained by the battle that had taken place here. The cold wind bit at Catelyn's face, but she barely noticed. Her thoughts were on Bran, on Rickon, her boys who should have been safe within these walls. She had trusted Winterfell to protect them, to be the stronghold it had always been. But even the great halls of the Starks had not been enough to keep the Ironborn out, to keep her children safe. Had Bran been here, overseeing the defense, as he had taken on the role of Lord of Winterfell in Robb's absence? Had he been brave, as she knew he was? Or had Theon taken him by surprise, betrayed him as he had betrayed their family? And Rickon, her youngest, still so small, still a child in every way. The thought of him cowering in some corner, terrified and alone, made her stomach twist with anguish. Where were they now? Were they still within the walls of Winterfell, hiding in the crypts perhaps, or had they been taken by Theon, hostages in his mad quest for glory? A shout from across the courtyard jolted Catelyn out of her dark thoughts. Her heart skipped a beat as she turned toward the sound, hoping it wasn't another messenger bearing grim news. One of the men who had ridden with them, his face flushed from the cold, was making his way toward her with urgency in his steps. "Lady Stark," he called, breathless by the time he reached her. "Lord Eddard requests your presence in the Great Hall." For a moment, Catelyn simply stood there, her mind trying to catch up with the words. Ned. Her heart surged with sudden, overwhelming relief. He was alive. She exhaled, the tension in her shoulders easing ever so slightly. "Thank you," she said to the man, her voice softer than she intended. Her hand instinctively reached out to Arya, as if to anchor herself in the present. Arya glanced up at her mother, her face still pale but with a spark of curiosity lighting her eyes at the mention of her father. Catelyn nodded, a small, tight smile forming on her lips, though it did little to erase the strain in her features. "Come," she said to Arya, her voice a bit steadier now. "Your father is waiting." As they walked across the courtyard, Catelyn's mind raced. The uncertainty had gnawed at her every second, her stomach twisting with dread as she imagined what could have gone wrong. But now, Ned was alive. That was all that mattered for the moment. The cold wind whipped at her face, but she barely felt it as she approached the great hall. Her steps quickened, her pulse hammering in her ears. The heavy wooden doors of the great hall loomed before them, the guards stationed outside pushed them open with a groan, revealing the dimly lit interior of the hall. Caitlin hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, Arya close at her side. The warmth of the fire greeted her, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside, but it did little to thaw the ice in her chest. As her eyes adjusted to the flickering torchlight, she saw Ned standing near the hearth, his figure casting a long shadow across the stone floor. He was alive, but worn. His face was etched with exhaustion, and the weight of leadership, of battle, hung heavy on his shoulders. His eyes, though tired, softened when they found hers. "Ned," she whispered, the word escaping her lips like a prayer. He turned to her, his expression unreadable for a moment, and then, as if sensing her relief, he smiled faintly. "Caitlin," he said, his voice steady, though laced with the same weariness she felt in her bones. His gaze flicked to Arya, and his smile widened ever so slightly, though the tension never fully left his face. Caitlin moved toward him, her steps quickening. She reached out, her fingers brushing against his hand, needing to feel the warmth of him, to confirm that he was truly there. He clasped her hand, his grip firm and reassuring, and for a moment, they stood in silence, the world outside their connection fading into the background. But the reality of their situation soon settled back in, and Caitlin's relief was tinged with urgency. "What news?" she asked, her voice low, almost afraid of the answer. "Bran, Rickon, are they safe?" Ned's face grew grim, and the warmth of the moment seemed to evaporate. "We haven't found them yet," he admitted quietly, his eyes darkening. "But there's hope. They weren't among the dead." Caitlin's heart clenched, a turbulent mix of fear and relief warring within her. Bran and Rickon weren't dead, but they weren't here either. The dread she had been trying so desperately to keep at bay surged forward, threatening to drown her. The thought of her boys out there, alone, vulnerable, gnawed at her, twisting her insides. Where were they? Were they hiding, terrified of the invaders who had laid claim to their home? Every possibility was a new nightmare, clawing at her already frayed nerves. Ned, standing tall but weary before her, must have sensed the turmoil roiling inside her. His hand, warm and solid, squeezed hers, grounding her in the moment, pulling her back from the edge. "We'll find them, Cat. I swear it," he said, his voice as steady as ever, but even he couldn't conceal the weight of uncertainty hanging between them. She nodded, though her throat tightened painfully, and her eyes stung with unshed tears. She had to believe him, had to cling to the hope that somehow, despite everything, their boys were safe. Even if that hope felt fragile, like thin ice beneath her feet, it was all she had. If she let herself fall into despair now, she might never rise again. "What of Lewin? Rodrik?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper, though her heart already feared the answer. Maester Lewin had been a constant in her children's lives, a steady, guiding presence through all the chaos. And Sir Rodrik, she had trusted him to keep them safe. She motioned to one of the guards, her hand trembling as she gestured for him to escort Arya out of the room. Reluctantly, Arya left, casting one last, confused glance at her parents. Caitlin's heart ached as she watched her daughter go, knowing that Arya's innocence had already been shattered by the horrors of war. She didn't need to hear this, not yet. Once Arya was safely out of earshot, Ned's expression grew grimmer, and the lines of weariness deepened on his face. "Both dead," he said quietly, the words falling heavy between them. "Long before we arrived, it would seem. Theon's been executing people daily. There's at least a dozen bodies in the Godswood." The news hit her like a physical blow, knocking the breath from her lungs. Lewin. Rodrik. Dead. Theon had turned their home into a place of slaughter, desecrating the Godswood, where her family had once found peace and solace. Now it was a graveyard, filled with the bodies of loyal men who had died defending her children, her home. Her hands, still clasped in Ned's, trembled as she spoke. "Theon did this." Her voice wavered, barely concealing the fury and grief rising within her. Ned's face darkened with a rare flash of anger. "He's a coward. He thought to seize power by taking Winterfell, and he murdered anyone who stood in his way. But he couldn't hold it for long. His men were weak, and they were no match for the force we brought." He paused, glancing toward the distant halls of their once proud home. "He'll answer for what he's done, Cat." Caitlin's breath came in shallow bursts, her chest tightening as she fought to keep control of the rage threatening to consume her. The fury boiled beneath the surface, a volatile mix of anger and heartbreak. Theon Greyjoy, the boy who had been raised under her roof, who had grown up beside her children, her sons, had betrayed them all. He had laughed and fought alongside Robb, watched over Bran, even shared meals at their table. She had trusted him, as had Ned. They had given him the care and shelter of Winterfell, a second home, and this was how he repaid that kindness. With betrayal. With bloodshed. She could still see it in her mind, the dead, scattered across the courtyard like broken toys. Their lives snuffed out because of his ambition, his cowardice. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice low, trembling with barely restrained fury. The question came out more as a growl than she intended. "In the cells," Ned replied, his tone flat, his face hard with the weight of all that had happened. "He fought, but he wasn't hard to detain. And he will face justice. True justice. I won't grant him a warrior's death. He'll not die with any honor." Catelyn's jaw clenched at the words. She felt no satisfaction at the thought of Theon in chains. The weight of his betrayal was too heavy, too deep to be soothed by the mere fact that he had been captured. He had torn apart her family, violated their home, and for what? A fleeting claim to power. A pathetic grab at something that would never be his. But what justice could there be for this? What could ever make right the horror he had inflicted? Her heart ached, the pain of it almost unbearable, and her anger turned inward, swirling into a storm of grief and fear. Bran. Rickon. Where were they? The thought of her youngest boys, so young, so innocent, haunted her. She could not allow herself to crumble, not now. She had to keep herself steady, had to hold on with everything she had left. Her family needed her. Ned needed her. Her children, wherever they were, needed her strength, her resolve. And she could not afford to fall apart, not with so much still at stake. But gods, how it hurt. How the grief pressed down on her, a weight so heavy she feared she might break beneath it. Her mind raced through all the possibilities. Bran had been acting as Lord of Winterfell, had he tried to negotiate? Rickon, too young to understand the gravity of their situation, would have looked to his brother for guidance. And Theon, once their companion, would have known their habits, their hiding places. He had been so close to them, too close. "Bring me to him," she said finally, her voice hoarse. The words left her lips before she fully realized what she was asking. She needed to see Theon, to look into the eyes of the boy who had betrayed them so completely. She needed to understand why. Ned hesitated, his brows furrowing in concern. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she whispered, though her heart thundered in her chest at the thought of facing him. "I need to know. I need to hear it from him." Ned gave a curt nod, understanding in his eyes, though he didn't like the idea. He motioned to one of the guards, who stepped forward to lead her to the cells. Catelyn straightened her back, forcing herself to walk with purpose, though her legs felt weak beneath her. She would confront him. She would face Theon Greyjoy, the boy she had once thought of almost as a son. And she would demand answers for the devastation he had wrought upon her family. For Bran, for Rickon, for all the lives he had destroyed. And when she found her boys, when, not if, she would make sure that no one, not even Theon Greyjoy, would ever harm them again. _________. Catelyn followed the guard, each step feeling heavier than the last as they made their way through the dark, cold halls of Winterfell. Her mind raced with thoughts of Theon, her boys, and the devastation that had been wrought upon their home. The stone walls felt different now, what had once been a sanctuary now seemed like a hollow shell of what Winterfell had once been. Every echo of her boots on the stone floor seemed to carry the weight of her grief and anger. The guard led her down a narrow staircase into the depths of the keep, the air growing colder, more oppressive with each step. The smell of damp stone and decay filled the air. She could hear the faint sound of chains rattling, the occasional murmur from the prisoners locked away in the cells below. But it was Theon she sought. The boy who had been like a brother to her sons, now rotting in the dungeon, shackled like a common criminal. She had thought him family once. That illusion was gone now, shattered like glass. When they reached the door to the cell, the guard stopped, looking to her for confirmation. Catelyn nodded, the tightness in her chest constricting even further. She steeled herself, her face hardening into a mask of control. She could not afford to show any weakness now. The guard unlocked the heavy iron door and pulled it open with a creak. Inside, the dim light of a single torch cast flickering shadows against the walls. There, slumped against the far wall in tattered clothes, was Theon Greyjoy. His once proud demeanor was gone. His face was gaunt, dirt smeared across his skin, and his wrists and ankles were bound with iron chains. His head hung low, and for a moment, he didn't even seem to register that someone had entered the room. Catelyn took a deep breath and stepped inside. The guard remained by the door, but she felt Ned's presence behind her, close enough to intervene if things escalated. The sight of Theon like this, broken and filthy, did little to soften her rage. He had brought this on himself. "Theon," she said, her voice cutting through the silence of the cell like a knife. At the sound of her voice, Theon looked up slowly, his eyes bleary and unfocused. It took him a moment to recognize her, but when he did, a flicker of something, fear, shame, perhaps regret, crossed his face. "Lady Stark," he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. He shifted, trying to sit up straighter, but the chains around his wrists clinked and held him back. Catelyn stepped forward, her fists clenched at her sides. She stared down at him, her eyes cold. "Do you even realize what you've done?" she asked, her voice low but filled with venom. "Do you understand the lives you've ruined, the trust you shattered?" Theon swallowed, his throat bobbing with the effort. "I never meant for it to be like this. I thought. You thought you could take Winterfell." Catelyn cut him off, her voice rising, sharp with disbelief. "You thought you could betray the family that raised you, the family that treated you as one of their own. My sons, Bran, Rickon, what have you done with them?" At the mention of her boys, Theon's gaze fell to the ground, shame washing over his features. He didn't answer right away, and the silence hung heavy in the air between them. Catelyn felt her pulse quicken, fear gripping her once more. What had he done? "Theon," she pressed, stepping closer, her voice shaking now. "Where are my sons?" Theon's lips parted, but no words came out at first. He blinked, his eyes glassy, as though struggling to form a coherent thought. I never wanted to hurt them," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "It was never supposed to happen like this." Catelyn's patience snapped. "Then what was supposed to happen? Did you think you would seize Winterfell and be hailed a hero? Did you think the North would bend the knee to you?" She leaned in, her eyes boring into his. "You know nothing of loyalty. You know nothing of family." Tears welled in Theon's eyes as he lifted his head to meet her gaze, his voice cracking with raw emotion. I thought it would make my father proud. I thought it would prove something." "Prove what?" Catelyn spat, her voice sharp as steel. "That you're capable of treachery. Of murder. Is that what you wanted?" But something broke in Theon then, a flash of anger, of long-buried pain. His voice rose, trembling with years of pent-up resentment. "Prove that for once I was good enough," he shot back, his words laced with bitterness. "I was taken from my family, ripped from my home, and no one came for me. Not my father, not my uncles. You can stand there and say I was part of your family, but we both know that's a lie. I wasn't a son to you, I was a prisoner. And every day, I was reminded how grateful I should be. Grateful to my captors." The words hung in the air, heavy and bitter, and for a moment, Catelyn saw something in Theon she had never seen before. The years of insecurity, the deep well of pain he had carried with him, hidden beneath his bravado and arrogance. She had never thought of him like this, always the cocky, foolish boy trying to prove himself. But now, in the dim light of the cell, that mask had slipped. What was left was someone haunted by his choices and the scars of a past he had never fully escaped. But Catelyn didn't waver. She couldn't afford to. Her heart burned with anger, not just for what he had done, but for how he tried to excuse it. Her sons, her boys, were out there, maybe alive, maybe not, because of him. "You think that justifies what you've done?" she asked, her voice cold and unforgiving. "That gives you the right to betray us? To take my children from me? To spill the blood of the men who served this house?" Theon's anger ebbed as quickly as it had flared. His face crumpled, the weight of his choices crushing him from within. For a fleeting moment, he was no longer the usurper who had turned on them, but the boy who had once been part of her household. The boy who had laughed with Rob, who had teased Bran, who had, for a time, been someone they trusted. But that boy was gone, drowned beneath the weight of his betrayal, and Catelyn couldn't let herself see him that way. Not anymore. She forced herself to harden her heart against the flicker of pity rising in her chest. Pity would not bring back what had been lost. "I don't want your regret," she said quietly, her voice tightening. "I want my sons." "Where are they, Theon?" Theon's shoulders sagged, the chains clinking softly as he slumped forward, the weight of his guilt nearly suffocating him. "I don't know," he whispered, his voice cracked and hollow. "They escaped, I swear it. I sent men after them, but they got away. I didn't." Catelyn's heart leapt at the possibility, but she forced herself to remain cautious, wary of letting hope blossom too quickly. "They escaped," she repeated, her voice steady but filled with an urgency she could barely contain. Theon nodded, his face a shade paler than before, fear etched in every line. "I took some boys from a farmer, about Bran and Rickon's age. My men killed them." His voice trembled as he continued, "I burned the boys and hung their bodies on the walls. I told everyone they were Bran and Rickon, but it was a lie." Each word cut deeper than the last, leaving Catelyn reeling as she processed the horrific confession. The image of those innocent lives snuffed out in a cruel masquerade flooded her mind, making bile rise in her throat. "You butchered them," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, heavy with disbelief and disgust. "In cold blood, you slaughtered children to serve your lies." Theon's gaze dropped to the ground, shame flooding his cheeks with a hot flush. "I had to do something," he murmured, desperation lacing his voice. "I thought if I could convince everyone they were dead, I could secure my place here. I thought it would help. But they were just boys. I didn't want it to be like this." Catelyn's heart pounded in her chest, her breath hitching as she struggled to contain her rising anger. "So my boys could be anywhere," she pressed, her voice trembling with fury. "They could be alive or dead, and you're telling me you just don't know?" Theon shook his head, the weight of his failure evident in his every gesture. "I'm done with him," Catelyn declared to Ned, her voice steady and unwavering, though a tempest of emotions churned inside her. "He can rot down here." The weight of her grief for Bran and Rickon pressed heavily on her heart, while Theon's betrayal coursed through her like a bitter poison, twisting her insides. She turned away, unwilling to let her sorrow fester in the presence of the man who had shattered her family. "I'm afraid not," Ned replied, his tone firm yet gentle. "Bring him to the courtyard," he commanded the guards, his resolve unyielding. They stepped into the dim cell, their heavy boots echoing against the stone, and grasped Theon under his arms, dragging him from his prison. Catelyn watched as he stumbled past her, a shadow of the boy who had once shared laughter and mischief with her children. "Please, no," Theon whimpered, desperation lacing his voice as he glanced back at her, his eyes wide and pleading. Catelyn felt a twinge of pity for the broken man he had become, but it quickly turned to frustration. "Ned, can't you take a few days to think about this?" she implored, her heart aching for the boy who had once been part of their family. "He may have become a monster, but rushing into a decision like this." "Cat," he said, tentatively stroking her face with a calloused hand, his touch grounding her in the storm of her emotions. "If I sit on this decision, I won't follow through with it. Unfortunately, I still care for the boy. If I allow myself to remember the child I took from Pike all those years ago, the boy who was so eager to please, I'll hesitate." Ned's eyes bore the weight of memories long buried, the fond recollections clashing with the stark reality of Theon's actions. Catelyn could see the turmoil in his expression, the conflict between his heart and his duty. She understood his dilemma but found it hard to reconcile her feelings with the notion of mercy for someone who had betrayed everything they held dear. Catelyn followed closely as they stepped into the waning light, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting a golden hue that soon faded into the encroaching darkness. A light flurry of snow began to fall, delicate flakes drifting silently to the ground, contrasting sharply with the grim atmosphere that surrounded them. The guards dragged Theon along, his feet trailing behind him, a pathetic image of a once proud boy reduced to a trembling man. He strained against their grip, desperation spilling from his lips as he begged for release. "Please, let me go," he cried, his voice a raw whisper, cracking under the weight of his panic. "I'll do anything. Just forgive me." But his pleas were met with cold indifference, the guards' faces stony as they marched him toward the courtyard. Caitlin felt a mix of anger and sorrow swell within her. How could this be the same boy who had played in their halls, who had shared their laughter and been welcomed as family? The thought twisted her heart, but she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the sight before her. As they reached the courtyard, Caitlin's breath caught in her throat. The bodies had been gathered on a cart like discarded refuse, the aftermath of a brutal fight. She could see the remnants of the struggle etched into the stone, blood staining the snow in vivid splashes, a stark reminder of the violence that had erupted in their home. The scent of iron hung in the air, mixing with the fresh snowfall, a grotesque perfume of death that clung to her senses. One of the guards moved to retrieve a wooden block from the stables, dragging it across the ground with a rough scrape. He set it down in the center of the courtyard, a grim altar for justice. Caitlin's heart raced, her pulse quickening as she realized the gravity of what was about to unfold. Ahead of her, Ned walked with a determined stride, his demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos surrounding them. His hand hovered over the hilt of ice, the ancestral sword of House Stark, as if seeking the strength to carry out the inevitable. She could see the conflict etched on his face, the burden of leadership weighing heavily on his shoulders. "Do it quickly," she whispered under her breath, though part of her screamed for him to reconsider. Each step he took toward Theon felt like a dagger to her heart, a reminder of the choices that had led them to this moment. Theon trembled, his bravado crumbling as he realized the finality of his fate. He glanced at Caitlin, desperation glimmering in his eyes, as if hoping to rekindle the bonds of trust that had once existed between them. "Caitlin, please. You know me. I never meant for any of this to happen." But Caitlin stood firm, her heart a tumult of emotions, grief for the boy he had been, anger at the man he had become, and sorrow for the family he had torn apart. "You made your choice, Theon," she said, her voice steady but cold. "And now you must face the consequences." The guard roughly shoved Theon down onto the steps, forcing him to his knees on the cold stone. The sound of chains rattling echoed in the quiet courtyard as Theon's hands trembled, his eyes wide with fear. Ned drew ice from its sheath, the blade gleaming ominously in the fading light, and paused for a moment, taking a long, steadying breath as he looked down at the boy he had once considered family. "Ned, please," Theon implored, desperation lacing his voice. "Think of Rob. How much this will hurt him. This was all a mistake, I swear it." "I am thinking of Rob," Ned replied, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of his duty. He couldn't let sentiment cloud his judgment, the time for mercy had passed. "I, Eddard of House Stark, find you, Theon Greyjoy, guilty of murder, treason, and countless other crimes against my family and my house. On behalf of my lord and son, Rob of House Stark, I condemn you to die." With each word, Ned felt the finality of the moment sinking in. He could see the flicker of hope die in Theon's eyes, replaced by a dawning comprehension of the repercussions of his actions. Theon's fate was sealed, and the responsibility weighed heavily on Ned's shoulders. As he raised ice, the chill of the blade matched the dread coiling in his gut, but he knew that in this moment, there was no turning back. Caitlin watched as the blade swung down, and with a final cry, Theon Greyjoy saw his end. Chapter 25, Rob X. Chapter text. Rob X. It was well past nightfall when Robb Stark finally made the weary trek back to his tent, his steps heavy with exhaustion. 5 days had passed since he rejoined the war campaign, and those days had been filled with near-constant conflict. The death of Renly Baratheon had shattered the already fragile alliances across the realm, leaving the battlefield in disarray. Some lords had rushed to pledge their swords to Stannis, others had groveled for Joffrey's forgiveness, and still others were lost in the chaos, fighting for no king at all. The unrest was spreading like wildfire. Upon reaching the battered walls of Harrenhal, Robb had heard troubling news. Houses were rising up, declaring themselves independent of any crown. Tywin Lannister, ever the strategist, had wasted no time, moving to crush these rebellions before they could rally under Stannis' banner. The Conningtons had been the first to rise. Their lord, fiercely loyal to Renly even in death, refused to bend the knee to Stannis or Joffrey. In a brazen act of defiance, he had called his banners, naming himself the rightful Lord of Storm's End. It was a dangerous move, one that could have sparked a wider rebellion if left unchecked. Tywin had acted swiftly. With the combined might of Lannister and Stark forces, the Connington army was crushed in a brutal skirmish. Their lord had fled, his whereabouts unknown. Some said he sought refuge with Stannis, others whispered he had vanished entirely, waiting for the moment to strike again. Robb entered the tent, the flap closing behind him with a faint rustle. The weight of the day, of the campaign, pressed down on his shoulders. Every victory felt hollow, every battle leading them further into a future he couldn't quite see. The North still needed him, but now he was entwined in a war that stretched far beyond the lands of his birth, far beyond any sense of honor or justice. He removed his gauntlets, tossing them onto a nearby table, his eyes distant. Connington had been just one of many, a single ripple in the growing storm of unrest. And more houses would follow, more blood would be spilled before the realm could settle once more. Robb felt the weight of his father's legacy, of his kingly crown, but now there was something else, an uncertainty that gnawed at the edges of his resolve. The lines between friend and foe were blurring. He fought alongside Lannisters, in a war he had never truly wanted to wage. They had once been enemies bound by blood feud, but now he found himself fighting under their banner, trying to keep the peace, even as the peace seemed more elusive than ever. And yet, no matter how far he marched or how many victories they secured on the battlefield, one thought remained a constant in Robb's mind: his family. They were the anchor in the turbulent sea of war, the reason he fought against the chaos that threatened to consume everything he held dear. A letter from his mother lay on his desk, its ink still fresh, but he had only managed to read the first line before the weight of it had driven him to put it down. "We have retaken Winterfell. Theon Greyjoy is dead." The words echoed in his mind, reverberating like a dull drumbeat. Theon, the boy who had grown up alongside him, who had laughed and trained with his brothers, who had been like a brother in all but blood, was a traitor. Robb had trusted him. He had shared his home, his family, and his very life with Theon, only to be met with betrayal when it mattered most. Robb's chest tightened at the thought, a mix of anger and sorrow bubbling just beneath the surface. How could a boy he once called a friend turn so quickly into an enemy? He leaned back in his chair, staring at the parchment as if it were a serpent poised to strike. His mind raced with questions. How had it come to this? What had driven Theon to turn against his own? The image of Winterfell being overrun by Iron Islanders filled his mind, a place he had once known as a sanctuary now tainted with the stain of treachery. It was not just the physical walls of the castle he mourned but the very essence of family that had been shattered. He thought of the last time he had seen Theon, the memory weighing heavily on his heart like a stone. Robb had sent him to treat with Balon Greyjoy, hoping to secure an alliance, or at least to understand his intentions. Theon had left with a fire in his eyes, a determined look that Robb had hoped meant he would succeed. But now, that fire seemed extinguished, replaced by betrayal and bloodshed. Maybe this is my fault, Robb thought bitterly. Perhaps if he had kept Theon closer, he could have prevented this catastrophic turn of events. If he had been a better brother, a better friend, maybe he wouldn't have sent Theon away to his doom. The weight of guilt pressed down on him, tightening its grip with every passing moment. No, he chastised himself, shaking his head as if to dispel the dark thoughts. Theon had made his own choices, he had forged his own path to ruin. He had to remember that. But just then, a flicker of warmth broke through the storm in Robb's heart, a memory of Roslyn. What would she say to him now? She would wrap her arms around him, look into his eyes and gently tell him that it wasn't his fault. He couldn't hold himself accountable for another man's actions, no matter how close they once had been. He missed her so much. It was a dull ache in his chest, a reminder of the love he had left behind while marching off to war. She would be well into her 5th month of pregnancy by now, and all he wished for was to feel her warmth, to hold her in his arms and forget the chaos that surrounded them. In his mind, he could picture her, radiant and strong, hands resting on her rounded belly, eyes sparkling with life and hope. Roslyn wrote often, each letter a lifeline connecting him to her. She spoke of her days in the capital, detailing songs as studies and her progress in needlework, the way she was slowly becoming a lady in her own right. There were bits and pieces about Tyrion and Varys, their odd conversations, and the strange alliance forming around them. But there was never a mention of Joffrey, and Robb felt a surge of protectiveness at the thought. He didn't want to imagine Roslin, vulnerable and alone in the shadow of the cruel Boy King. But he couldn't help but think that her pregnancy must be evident by now. He had returned to Harrenhal to hear congratulations and well wishes from those who had supported him, but he also heard the sniggers and whispers that skittered through the halls like rats. Rumors tainted by envy and malice whispered that the child was not his at all but a bastard of the king. The thought twisted in his gut like a knife, and he found himself clenching his fists in frustration. He could almost hear Roslin's laughter in his mind, see her smile brightening even the darkest corners of his heart. He longed to return to her, to protect her from the prying eyes and poisonous tongues that sought to tear them apart. Robb vowed that when this war was over, he would make it back to her, and they would build a life together, a life free from the treachery and betrayal that had become their reality. But first, he had to confront the chaos surrounding him. There would be time for dreams later, now was the moment to focus on what lay ahead. With a deep breath, Robb pushed aside the weight of his thoughts and turned his attention back to the maps spread across the table before him, ready to lead his men into the fray once more. It was early the next morning when Robb Stark made his way to the War Council, the chill of dawn still lingering in the air. The world outside was shrouded in mist, the soft glow of the rising sun casting an ethereal light over the camp. He pulled his cloak tighter around himself, the fabric thick against the morning breeze, and steeled himself for the meeting ahead. As he entered the tent, the atmosphere shifted. The War Council was in full swing, and the air hummed with tension and purpose. Tywin Lannister, a figure of commanding presence, stood over the expansive table that was littered with maps and markers, his face set in a stern expression. Clad in a fitted black jacket, he looked ready to don his armor, a reminder of the battles that lay ahead. The flickering lanterns cast shadows across his sharp features, highlighting the lines of experience etched deep into his skin. Next to Tywin, Jaime Lannister lounged with a relaxed demeanor that seemed almost at odds with the seriousness of their discussion. He held a cup of wine, swirling the crimson liquid idly as he leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. Even at this early hour, the wine was a comfort to him, a steady companion as he observed the unfolding events with a mixture of amusement and boredom. Lord Stark Tywin addressed Robb, his voice carrying a weight of authority that demanded attention. "Thank you for joining us." Robb straightened, meeting Tywin's gaze with a steely resolve of his own. "Of course, my lord," he replied, his tone measured. He stepped closer to the table, taking in the intricate maps laid before them. They depicted the shifting allegiances and battle lines that had become the lifeblood of their campaign. Dark red markings indicated the territories still loyal to Joffrey, while the faded hues of blue and green hinted at houses that had wavered in their loyalties, now uncertain in a world turned upside down by war. "Let us get to the matter at hand," Tywin said, his voice cutting through the tension in the room as he gestured for Robb to take a seat at the table. "Thanks to Lord Stark's efforts," Tywin continued, "House Tyrell has pledged themselves to our cause. I've already written to Mace Tyrell, instructing him to gather the remainder of his forces and join us as we return to the capital." He placed a wooden marker on the table, emblazoned with the sigil of House Tyrell, a golden rose. Robb sat down, feeling the weight of Tywin's words. Return to the capital. The idea hit him with unexpected force, a mixture of hope and anxiety rising in his chest. His heart quickened at the thought of being reunited with Roslin. It had been months since he had last seen her, months of battle and bloodshed. The prospect of returning to King's Landing was suddenly not just about strategy but about her, the woman carrying his child. But his thoughts were interrupted by Tywin's sharp tone, his focus pulled back to the War Council. "We have received word that Stannis is gathering his forces," Tywin said, his expression unreadable but his eyes keen, sharp as ever. "The forces he gained following Renly's death were unfortunate but unavoidable. What concerns us now is his next move." Tywin's hand moved across the map, hovering over the stretch of sea between Dragonstone and King's Landing. "Our spies report that Stannis plans to attack Blackwater Bay directly from Dragonstone." He placed another carved figure on the map, the sigil of House Baratheon, Stannis' flaming heart, now glaring at them from the sea. 200 ships, Tywin said, his voice heavy with the reality of the situation. "That's the size of his fleet, and we don't have the forces in King's Landing to contend with a naval assault of that magnitude." Robb's brow furrowed as he studied the map. The thought of such a fleet bearing down on King's Landing was enough to unsettle even the most seasoned commanders. "And what are our options?" he asked, feeling the weight of the decision bearing down on them. "Our only option," Tywine said, locking eyes with Robb, "is to get there before Stannis or hope the city can survive a short siege. If his forces breach the walls, they will take it. King's Landing does not have enough men to hold against Stannis and his army." Tywine's hand swept across the map again, tracing the vulnerable coastline. "If Stannis wins, he will take the throne. Every house that ever aligned with Renly, every lord who ever questioned Joffrey's claim, will flock to his side." The stakes were clear. Stannis wasn't just another contender for the throne, he was the greatest threat the crown had faced yet. If they didn't act swiftly, the entire realm would fall into chaos. "And what of Blackwater Bay itself?" Robb asked, his thoughts racing ahead. "If we can't outnumber his fleet, is there a way to outmaneuver it?" Tywine's eyes flicked to Jaime, who had remained silent, observing the map with a careful eye. "Our spies report that Stannis will approach by night," Tywine said. "If we get there first, we can use the defenses around the bay to our advantage. But time is not on our side. We have to move now." "We march on King's Landing," Tywine said, his voice firm, the decision final. "The Tyrells will meet us there, and we will be ready for Stannis when he arrives. But understand this, if we fail, it's not just the city that will fall. It's the entire realm." Robb glanced at the map again, his gaze lingering over King's Landing, then back to the sea. The stakes had never been higher, but one thing was certain, he would fight not just for his house, but for Roslyn, for the future of their child, and for the hope that maybe, just maybe, peace could be found in the chaos of war. "And what of the Iron Islands?" Jaime interjected, his finger tracing the outline of the small islands off the west coast of Westeros on the war map laid before them. "Balon Greyjoy may be short-sighted, but he is a dangerous foe. The Iron Islands boast the largest fleet in the realm." Tywine's demeanor shifted, a flicker of amusement dancing in his eyes. "Leave that to me," he said, confidence radiating from him like a well-crafted armor. "I will deal with the Greyjoys and ensure that their ambitions are curtailed. We cannot afford to be distracted by their petty raids when Stannis poses such an imminent threat." Robb's brow furrowed. "We should send men north," he proposed, his voice firm. 10,000, or so. My father may have taken back Winterfell, but many northern keeps are still held by the Ironborn. They will not sit idle while we're preoccupied down here." Jaime let out a sharp laugh, the sound echoing in the tense air. "Give an army to Ned Stark," he scoffed. "We're fighting a war down here, boy. We need every man we can get. Your father is secure in Winterfell, why should we divert our resources?" Robb's eyes hardened, and he leaned forward, his voice lowering but gaining intensity. "And do you think the northern lords in that army will continue to fight for your king if he allows their families to be terrorized by pirates? If we leave the Iron Islands unchecked, their raids will only grow bolder. Every town they sack, every family they terrorize will create resentment that festers like a wound. They won't fight for a king who abandons them." Tywine observed the exchange, his expression inscrutable as he weighed the potential fallout of Jaime's dismissive attitude. "The North has always been fiercely loyal, but loyalty is a two-way street," he said slowly. "If the Ironborn are allowed to run rampant, it will not just affect the North, it will embolden every other house that feels slighted or neglected." Jaime shrugged, clearly unconvinced. "And what do you suggest we do, Robb? Send half our forces north to play games with the Greyjoys while Stannis bears down on us? You're young, you might not grasp the complexity of war yet." Robb clenched his fists, the tension between them palpable. "I may be young, but I understand loyalty and honor, things you seem to overlook in your pursuit of power." He paused, forcing himself to breathe and temper his anger. "If you don't think the northern lords will side with a man who lets their families be slaughtered, you underestimate them. They will rally behind whoever can protect them and their homes." Tywine leaned back, a calculating glint in his eyes as he assessed the young Stark. "Very well, we shall send a contingent north. But make no mistake, Robb, our priority remains the capital. We'll send 2,000 men. You must understand the balance of power, we cannot afford to weaken ourselves too much." Robb nodded, relief washing over him but tempered with a sense of foreboding. I understand, my lord. But we cannot let the Ironborn go unchallenged. I want those 10,000 men ready to march north as soon as we've dealt with Stannis. Jaime rolled his eyes but held his tongue, perhaps sensing the weight of Robb's resolve. The North had always been a land of strong wills and even stronger loyalties, and Robb's determination was a reflection of that spirit. Tywin straightened, the glimmer of respect flickering in his gaze. Then it is settled. We will draw up plans for both fronts. But know this, Robb, you will have to bear the responsibility for whatever consequences arise from splitting our forces. I understand, Robb replied, his voice steady. But if we are to win this war, we cannot do it with one hand tied behind our back. We need to be willing to fight for every part of the realm, not just the parts we can easily see. Tywin nodded, his expression inscrutable, yet there was an undeniable shift in the atmosphere. As Robb sat back, the enormity of the decision settled on his shoulders, but he felt a flicker of hope as well. Perhaps, together, they could turn the tide of the war, not just against Stannis, but for all the families who relied on them, from the icy reaches of the north to the warm shores of the south. Chapter 26, Roslyn 11. Chapter text. Roslyn 11. Roslyn stood in her chambers, preparing for bed as the evening light faded into shadows. The soft fabric of her nightdress clung to her growing stomach, making her condition unmistakably clear. After Joffrey's brazen announcement, Tyrion had stepped in to clarify her situation with a declaration to all noble houses that, while intended to reassure her, felt like a double-edged sword. Lord Robb and Lady Roslyn of House Stark are proud to announce that they are expecting their first child. The couple is delighted and cannot wait until the family can reunite in Winterfell. It was a carefully crafted statement, designed to lend legitimacy to her pregnancy in a sea of uncertainty. Even if the whispers of her alleged dalliance with Joffrey had held a grain of truth, the reality remained clear: this child was Robb's, conceived on their wedding night. Yet, in the treacherous political landscape of King's Landing, such nuances were easily drowned out by the clamor of more salacious tales. Now, as Roslyn prepared for sleep, the shadows danced across the walls, and her thoughts swirled with the weight of the rumors surrounding her. Each time a well-meaning noble approached her to offer congratulations or best wishes, there was always the unspoken undercurrent of derision. She could almost hear the whispers that followed her, laden with scorn and pity: "That's the king's bastard or her poor lord husband." Their eyes, filled with judgment, spoke volumes, and she felt the heat of their disdain wash over her. She had learned quickly that in King's Landing, truth often mattered less than perception. Each whispered remark cut deeper, reminding her that no matter how much she wanted to celebrate the life growing inside her, there were those who would relish in casting shadows over her happiness. Roslyn brushed a hand over her abdomen, a soothing gesture meant to calm the fluttering emotions within. She felt a surge of warmth and protectiveness for the child, the innocent being who would soon enter a world fraught with complexities. This child was a Stark, she reminded herself. As Roslyn settled into bed, pulling the soft blankets around her, she found herself caught in a cycle of worry. Would they ever reunite? What kind of world would their child be born into? She closed her eyes, willing herself to drift into a peaceful sleep, but the shadows of doubt lingered, relentless and suffocating. ________. Roslyn was jolted awake by a heavy pounding on her chamber door. "My lady," a guard shouted, his voice tinged with urgency. "Lady Stark." Heart racing, she scrambled out of bed, her mind racing with confusion. She opened the door just enough to peek outside, ensuring her state of undress was concealed. "What is going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "My lady, you need to come with me," the guard insisted, urgency lacing his words. "The city is under attack." Panic surged through her veins as the implications of his words sunk in. Roslyn quickly turned away from the door, her heart pounding in her chest. "Please, come quickly," the guard urged, glancing over his shoulder as if expecting an immediate threat. Roslyn took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. "Focus. You need to get dressed." She threw on a simple overcoat over her nightdress, grateful for its warmth but frustrated by how cumbersome it felt. With her hands shaking, she struggled to fasten the buttons, her mind racing through thoughts of Robb. Where is he? Is he safe? "Ready," she declared, opening the door wide enough to step out, her resolve hardening. The guard's eyes widened slightly at her expression, determination mixed with an underlying fear. He motioned for her to follow him, leading her through the dimly lit corridors of the keep. Rosalind's heart raced with every step, the echoes of their hurried footsteps bouncing off the stone walls. The castle was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos she imagined awaited them outside. As they descended the stairs, she couldn't help but worry about the safety of her family. Rob could be here. He could be fighting. What if this attack was more than just a skirmish? What if it was an all-out assault? The very thought sent a shiver down her spine. "Stay close to me," the guard instructed, his voice steady but urgent. Rosalind nodded, her heart racing as they maneuvered through the throngs of soldiers. Her eyes darted around as they moved through corridors, her breath catching at the sight of other women, many in the same state of undress as her. Mothers clutched their daughters tightly, their faces pale with fear, their eyes wide as they followed the guards with hurried steps. The air was thick with whispered prayers and stifled sobs, the tension of the moment pressing heavily on everyone. "Where are we going?" Rosalind asked the guard leading her, her voice laced with a mixture of anxiety and determination. She pressed a hand instinctively to her stomach, as if to shield her unborn child from the fear swirling around them. "The Queen has granted sanctuary to all the women of the court," the guard replied, his tone brisk but reassuring. "You're to remain in the Tower of the Hand until it is deemed safe to leave." The guard's words did little to ease the gnawing anxiety building in her chest. "And where is the Lady Sansa?" she pressed, her concern for Rob's sister bubbling to the surface. She and Sansa had grown close in recent months, sharing whispered conversations and moments of solace in a city that always seemed poised on the brink of chaos. "We're headed to collect the Lady Sansa from her chambers now," the guard answered, his gaze forward as they made their way through the winding halls. "I swear to you, my lady, you and Lady Sansa will both be safe." Rosalind wasn't sure if she believed him, but she had no choice but to follow. As they turned a corner, the sound of distant shouting and the clanging of weapons echoed faintly through the walls, a chilling reminder of the violence unfolding beyond the castle's protective stone. The guard quickened his pace, leading Rosalind past more huddled groups of frightened women and children, some whispering to each other, others standing in numb silence. The weight of uncertainty hung over them all, and Rosalind couldn't help but wonder what was happening in the streets of King's Landing. How close were the attackers? Were the city's defenses holding, or had the battle already breached the walls? They reached Sansa's chambers, and the guard knocked urgently. After a moment, the door creaked open, and Sansa emerged, her face pale but composed. She wore a simple gown, hastily thrown on, her hair unkempt. Her wide blue eyes flickered with worry as she looked from the guard to Rosalind. "Rosalind," Sansa breathed, stepping forward and gripping her hands tightly. "What's happening?" Rosalind squeezed her hands in return, trying to offer reassurance despite her own trembling nerves. "Sansa dear, come here. We're going to be fine, no matter what happens, we're together." Sansa nodded, though her gaze remained distant, fear clouding her expression. "And Rob?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Rosalind's heart clenched at the question, but she forced herself to stay strong. "I don't know. He might be here, he might not. But we'll be safe, Sansa. We have to believe that." The guard gestured for them to move, and they fell in line with the other women being led to the tower. As they walked, Rosalind wrapped an arm around Sansa's shoulders, pulling her close. She had to be strong for her, for Rob, for the child growing inside her. The flickering torches lining the hallways cast eerie shadows, the cold stone walls offering little comfort as they neared the Tower of the Hand. Rosalind's mind raced, torn between worry for Rob and the unsettling reality of their situation. As they entered the main chamber, a wave of anxious energy washed over Rosalind. The room was crowded, filled with women of all ages, some looking as if they were nearing 80, their faces etched with lines of worry, while others clutched newborn babes tightly against their chests, their bodies swaying gently in a futile attempt to soothe them. The atmosphere was heavy with tension, and the low murmur of whispers echoed off the stone walls, punctuated by the occasional soft cry of a child. At the head of the room, Rosalind's gaze was drawn to Cersei Lannister, seated imperiously in a wooden chair that bore an unsettling resemblance to a throne. The Queen exuded an air of authority, her golden hair cascading around her shoulders like a halo, but her sharp green eyes betrayed a flicker of unease as she surveyed the scene. A couple of her ladies-in-waiting stood nearby, attending to her, one of them dutifully pouring wine into a goblet, the red liquid glimmering ominously in the torchlight. Suddenly, a small brown-haired woman darted through the crowd and rushed towards Sangza. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around Sangza, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Shay!" Sangza exclaimed, her face lighting up with relief and joy as she returned the hug. "Shay, this is my brother's wife, Lady Rosalind Stark." Shay dropped into a quick curtsy, her movements practiced but slightly rushed. Rosalind noticed the warmth in the woman's demeanor and the genuine fondness between her and Sangza. "No, you don't need to curtsy," Sangza corrected her gently, an affectionate smile gracing her lips. "Just bow your head." Shay looked up at Rosalind, her dark eyes sparkling with curiosity. "It's a pleasure to meet you, my lady," she said, her voice friendly and melodic. "Shay is my new handmaiden," Sangza explained to Rosalind, her voice carrying a hint of pride. "Lord Tyrion arranged for her after my last maid fell ill. She is from Essos and she may be a bit unfamiliar with the duties of a handmaiden, but she is incredibly kind and eager to learn." Sangza's eyes sparkled with affection as she spoke, clearly appreciating Shay's willingness to help in these turbulent times. Rosalind offered a small smile in return, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't shake off the lingering doubts about why Tyrion, ever the strategist, would appoint a new handmaiden for Sangza. It seemed odd that he would concern himself with such a trivial matter while the city was engulfed in chaos. Yet, she decided against pressing Sangza for details. There was enough uncertainty swirling around them without adding suspicion to the mix. The reality of their surroundings began to sink in for Rosalind as she took a moment to observe the scene around her. Women huddled together, exchanging quiet words, their faces lined with worry. Some clutched each other for reassurance, while others cast nervous glances toward the door, as if expecting danger to burst in at any moment. The tension was palpable, and she could feel her heart pounding in rhythm with the rising fear in the chamber. "Do you think it will be over soon?" Sangza asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as she leaned closer to Rosalind, her brow furrowed with concern. Rosalind placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I believe so," she replied, though she could not shake her own doubts. "We must stay hopeful. We have to trust that the city's defenders will hold." As they spoke, Circe's voice cut through the din, commanding and assertive. "Ladies, please, listen carefully," she declared, rising from her seat, the air thickening with her presence. All eyes turned to the Queen, the atmosphere shifting as everyone awaited her next words. "We must remain calm. The city will not fall tonight. We will not let it." Rosalind exchanged a quick glance with Sangza and Shay, the unspoken worries hanging between them. Whatever was happening outside the walls of the castle was beyond their control, but inside this chamber, they could at least find a semblance of safety in each other's company. They had to hold on to that, to the hope that they would survive this night and whatever lay ahead. _________. The night seemed endless. Hours stretched into an eternity, with no word from the outside. The distant roars of battle echoed through the thick walls, a constant reminder of the danger lurking beyond. The clashing of steel and the cries of men filled the air, a grim soundtrack that kept everyone on edge. Rosalind glanced at Sangza, who sat stiffly beside her, eyes wide and unblinking. She placed a hand on her sister-in-law's arm, trying to offer comfort. "Sangza, you should try to rest," Rosalind urged gently, though she knew how impossible the suggestion was. Sleep would be hard to find in such an atmosphere, and even harder to keep. Around them, the chamber was filled with the quiet misery of waiting. Some of the women wept softly, their faces buried in their hands, while others whispered hurried prayers, their voices trembling. Many just sat in silence, staring into nothing, their expressions frozen in fear. Every now and then, a loud crash or shout from the outside made the room collectively flinch, their nerves raw from anticipation. Yet above them all, Circe remained unmoved. She sat like a queen on her makeshift throne, her lips red from the wine that filled her goblet again and again. She hadn't spoken in hours, her face a mask of cold indifference as she watched the room, draining cup after cup. The oppressive silence within the room deepened as the night dragged on, punctuated only by the occasional sob or whispered prayer. Rosalind's heart pounded in her chest with every muffled crash or distant scream, her mind racing with thoughts of Rob and the fate of the city outside these walls. Rosalind forced herself to stand, her swollen belly making it impossible to remain still for long. Restless, she made her way to one of the windows despite the guards' warnings to keep their heads down and avoid looking outside. Curiosity gnawed at her, and she couldn't help herself. The bay below was filled with ships, all bearing the burning heart sigil of Stannis Baratheon. Beyond, on land, soldiers hoisting the same banner pressed against the gates of the city, while the crown's men braced for battle just behind the walls. Her eyes followed the soldiers patrolling the battlements of the Red Keep when suddenly a bright green flash erupted across the bay. It exploded with such ferocity that Roslyn instinctively ducked, her heart pounding as she heard the women behind her scream. The chaotic roar from the bay echoed through the air. Trembling, she forced herself to look again, her fingers gripping the window ledge. The bay was ablaze, most of Stannis' fleet consumed by fire, the eerie green flames of wildfire reflecting in the churning waters. Wildfire, Roslyn thought, but it wasn't enough. Stannis' soldiers were already at the city gates, undeterred by the destruction unfolding behind them. A sudden crash from outside made the room erupt once again in screams. The loud sound of metal against stone reverberated through the walls, followed by the unmistakable roar of a large crowd. Fear rippled through the chamber like a gust of icy wind. Some women began to cry openly now, while others whispered desperate prayers under their breath. "Is this it?" one woman whispered, her voice quivering with panic. "Are they inside?" The fear in the room was palpable, thickening the already stifling air. Roslyn's eyes darted to the door, her heart skipping a beat with every noise. She wished for Robb's presence more than anything, his calming voice, his steady hand, his strength. Suddenly, Cersei spoke, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "If they get inside, none of us will be spared." Her words were slow, deliberate, each one heavy with meaning. She took another long sip of wine, her eyes never leaving the room. Best to remember that. A ripple of horror spread through the chamber at the Queen's words. Roslyn could feel the fear intensifying, but what chilled her more was the cool detachment in Cersei's tone. There was no fear in her voice, only cold calculation. Cersei lifted her goblet, swirling the wine within, and gave a bitter smile to Roslyn. Roslyn exchanged a glance with Sansa, who had gone pale, her knuckles white as she gripped the arm of her chair. Shae stood protectively behind her, her face set in a grim line. "I don't think they'll get in," Sansa murmured, almost to herself, though her voice wavered with uncertainty. "Lord Tyrion, he'll stop them." Cersei let out a mirthless laugh, a sound devoid of hope. "My brother. The half-man." She shook her head, her gaze icy. "You're putting your faith in the wrong person, little dove." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, filling the room with a new sense of dread. Roslyn's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to stay composed. Panic wouldn't help anyone here. Suddenly, the heavy doors at the far end of the chamber creaked open, a sound that cut through the thick tension like a blade. A guard stumbled in, his face flushed and eyes wide with panic, breath coming in short, desperate gasps. Every woman in the room turned toward him, the atmosphere electrifying with anticipation. "Your Grace," he exclaimed, voice cracking under the weight of his news. "Lord Tyrion has destroyed most of the fleet, but their land army is at the gates of the city. We won't hold much longer. It's time, Your Grace." A collective gasp swept through the room, quickly morphing into cries of alarm and despair. Cersei sprang to her feet, her expression a mix of fury and determination, and she swiftly grabbed Tommen, who had been sleeping peacefully at her side until now. The boy rubbed his eyes sleepily, struggling to comprehend the chaos erupting around him as his mother yanked him up. "Where are you going?" Roslyn called out, her voice cutting through the commotion as she stepped forward, confronting the Queen with a fierce resolve. "I won't die in here with you." Cersei spat, her tone laced with contempt and fear. "When the time comes, Sir Ilyn will ensure it's quick for all of you. Unless you'd rather face Stannis's men." With that, Cersei swept out of the room, the door slamming shut behind her with a resounding thud that echoed off the stone walls. In an instant, further chaos erupted, the noise in the chamber rising to a fever pitch as the women began to shout and cry, their panic spilling over into wild gestures and frantic whispers. Roslyn's heart sank, her stomach churning with dread. She turned to Sansa, whose face had gone pale, the color draining from her cheeks as she struggled to grasp the gravity of their situation. Shay moved closer to Sangza, wrapping her arms protectively around the young woman, a fierce look in her eyes that spoke of loyalty amidst chaos. "We can't stay here," someone cried out, voice trembling with fear. "What if they come for us? What if they breach the walls?" Sangza's voice trembled, her gaze darting toward the door as if she expected it to burst open any moment. "What then?" Roslyn took a deep breath, trying to quell the rising tide of panic inside her. "We'll find a way out," she promised, though the words felt hollow. Roslyn rushed to the front of the chamber, standing tall in front of Circe's abandoned chair as she faced the room full of terrified women. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm, drawing on whatever strength she had left. The scene was chaos, mothers clutching their children, noble women whispering frantically to one another, and the ever-present sound of battle creeping closer. Roslyn knew that if they did nothing, they would be sitting ducks, waiting for death or worse. She took a deep breath and addressed them, her voice clear and unwavering despite the dread tightening her throat. "There are men at those gates," she began, her words slicing through the panicked murmurs. "And make no mistake, they want you dead or worse. I'm sorry, I know it's hard to hear, but it's the truth." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the room, some women gasping, others shaking their heads as if denying reality would change it. Roslyn pressed on, her voice growing louder, more urgent. "I will not sit here and wait for them to slaughter us," she declared, her tone fierce and determined. "If anyone wants to come with me, I'm leaving now." Her words hung in the air, echoing off the stone walls as the room fell into a stunned silence. Roslyn could feel the weight of their gazes, eyes filled with fear, hesitation, and a flicker of hope. She knew the risks, they all did. But she refused to let fear keep her here, huddled in a corner waiting for the inevitable. There had to be a way out, a way to survive. One of the older women, her hands trembling as she clutched a rosary to her chest, spoke up. "Where will we go? The city's on fire. They'll catch us outside the walls." Roslyn met her gaze, her jaw clenched with determination. "We'll find another way. We don't need to leave the city, there are hidden tunnels beneath the Red Keep. Lord Tyrion has mentioned them before. If we can reach them, we might have a chance. But staying here..." She glanced around the room, her eyes hardening as the reality of their situation settled over her. "If we stay, we're already dead." Sangza, who had remained by Roslyn's side, stepped forward, her voice soft but resolute. "I'll come with you." Her hand shook slightly, but there was a fire in her eyes, a willingness to fight for survival. Roslyn nodded, placing a comforting hand on Sangza's shoulder. "Good," she said, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "We'll protect each other." Only a handful of women stood up, their faces pale and uncertain. Among them, Roslyn recognized Desmara Redwine, her gaze fierce yet haunted. Next to her was a mother clutching her infant tightly, determination mingled with fear in her eyes. Shay, Sangza's handmaid, stood resolutely beside them, her expression a mix of concern and defiance. The rest of the women remained rooted in place, too terrified to move. They were paralyzed by the unknown, at least in this room, they understood the fate that awaited them if they chose to stay. "We leave now," Roslyn declared, her voice resolute despite the tremor of fear coiling in her stomach. "Stay close, and don't look back." With that, she took a deep breath and led the group toward the door, her heart racing as she stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The distant sounds of battle roared like thunder outside, growing louder and more ominous with each passing moment, but Roslyn forced herself to keep moving, her mind solely focused on survival. As she navigated the corridor, the remnants of chaos were evident. Cups lay scattered across the floor, remnants of hastily abandoned gatherings, ornate vases lay shattered, their delicate pieces glistening like fallen stars in the fading light, victims of the panic that had swept through the palace. Propped against one window was a sword, clearly left behind by a soldier in a desperate hurry. Roslyn picked it up, the cold steel feeling heavy and foreign in her hands. She gripped the hilt tightly, struggling against its weight, but she knew she had no choice, it was better to be armed than defenseless. Her breaths quickened as she forged ahead, adrenaline surging through her veins. There were no immediate signs that Stannis' men had breached the walls yet, but the unsettling sounds of conflict echoed ever closer, a constant reminder of the danger lurking just beyond their sanctuary. Each step was a mix of determination and dread, and Rosalind silently urged herself forward, unwilling to take any chances. She could not afford to falter now. As they reached the end of the hallway, the door to the main stairwell stood ajar, a sliver of darkness yawning before them. Rosalind hesitated for a moment, the sounds of battle still rumbling like distant thunder. She glanced back at the women. "We'll take the stairs down to the courtyard," she said, her voice steady. "It might be our best chance to escape." The air felt thick with anxiety, but the mother nodded, determination etched into her features. Shay, the handmaiden, clutched Sansa's arm tightly, her eyes darting nervously from the door to Rosalind. "What if we're caught?" Shay asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Rosalind glanced at the door, then back at the women. "If we stay here, we're trapped. I won't let that happen. If we move now, we might find a way out." She took a deep breath and pushed the door open, revealing the narrow staircase that spiraled down into darkness. The women hesitated but followed closely behind as Rosalind descended cautiously, feeling each step beneath her. The stone felt cold against her bare feet, a stark contrast to the rising heat of fear in her chest. Halfway down, the sound of clashing steel and distant screams became clearer, cutting through the air like a knife. Rosalind paused, her heart pounding. "We must hurry," she urged, picking up the pace. "They are getting closer." They reached the bottom of the stairs, and Rosalind peered around the corner into the dimly lit courtyard. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning wood, and she could see flickering shadows as the chaos unfolded outside. "Stay close," she instructed, her grip tightening on the sword. She scanned the area, her heart sinking at the sight of a few guards hastily organizing themselves, shouting commands, their faces grim. The sound of footsteps echoed from the main gate, and she knew they didn't have much time. Rosalind turned to the women behind her, urgency in her eyes. "We can slip out through the back entrance," she said, pointing toward a narrow path leading away from the chaos. "If we stay low and move quickly, we might make it to the stables." With one last look at the chaos unfolding before them, Rosalind led the group toward the path. As they hurried along, the weight of the sword felt heavier with each step, a constant reminder of the danger they faced. They moved in silence, the only sounds their hurried breaths and the distant clamor of battle. Suddenly, a loud crash resonated from the courtyard, and Rosalind glanced back to see a group of soldiers break through the gates, their armor gleaming ominously in the firelight. "Run!" she shouted, adrenaline surging through her. The women rushed forward, following Rosalind's lead as she navigated the narrow passage. She could hear shouts behind them, and her heart raced. They were running out of time. As they rounded a corner, Rosalind spotted the stables up ahead, the large doors slightly ajar, a sliver of hope shining through the chaos. "Almost there," Rosalind urged, her voice barely above a whisper. Each step felt like a promise, hope flickering within her like a fragile flame. If they could just reach the horses, they could escape. If they escaped, they could survive. But as they neared the stables, her heart sank. A soldier emerged from the shadows, blade in hand and spattered in blood. His armor bore the stag of Baratheon, but there was no comfort in that. His eyes gleamed with a wicked hunger. "What do we have here then?" he sneered, his voice thick with malice. "All this fighting, and I could do with a woman's company. I think I'll start with you, my lady." He pointed directly at Rosalind, a twisted grin spreading across his face. Rosalind's pulse quickened as she sized him up, her mind racing. She could see the cruelty in his eyes, and she knew what he intended. Slowly, she raised her sword, her voice steady despite the tremor in her limbs. "I'd like to see you try." The soldier laughed, a cold, harsh sound, and stepped toward her. Rosalind acted on instinct, spitting in his face. The man recoiled, wiping the spittle from his eyes, his expression darkening with rage. Without a word, he lunged at her, knocking the sword from her hands with ease. Rosalind gasped, stumbling back as the blade clattered to the ground. Behind her, she could see Shay ushering the other women into the safety of the stables, but Rosalind had no time to think about them. The soldier grabbed her by the arm, his grip like iron. "This is it," she thought, her breath catching in her throat. She closed her eyes, bracing herself for the inevitable, but just as his hand tightened, an arrow whistled past her ear and embedded itself in the soldier's eye. The man let out a guttural cry before collapsing to the ground in a lifeless heap. Roslyn's eyes flew open, her chest heaving with shock. She turned, searching for the archer, her heart racing with uncertainty. Had it been a friend or a foe? From the battlements of the keep, she saw the archer who walked away as quickly as he had come to her aid, clearly seeking his next mark. A handful of men moved toward her on the ground, and at the forefront of the group was a soldier who stood out, his presence commanding. He was still some distance away, his helmet obscuring his face, but there was something familiar about the way he moved. Roslyn Stark, a voice called out from the courtyard, and for the first time, Roslyn noticed the scale of the battle beyond the gates. The fighting raged in the bay, but it was not just Stannis's men she saw now. Soldiers wearing the sigils of the Baratheon Stag, the Lannister Lion, the Tyrell Rose, and the Stark Direwolf fought side by side, cutting down their enemies with ferocity. The man